She thought she'd found love, until he abandoned her at a frozen train station with nothing but broken promises and an empty purse. Clara Hayes stood alone in the Montana wilderness, her dreams shattered, her future uncertain. But when a rugged cowboy offered her something impossible, a home, a job, and a chance to start over, she had no idea she was stepping into a story of danger, redemption, and a love worth fighting for. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The whistle of the 3:15 train to Billings cut through the frigid November air like a knife through silk, sharp and final. Clara Hayes stood on the wooden platform of Willow Creek Station, watching the metal beast disappear into the gray Montana horizon, taking with it the last remnants of her foolish, naive heart. Her hands trembled, not from the cold that bit through her thin traveling coat, but from the rage and humiliation burning in her chest like hot coals. 20 minutes ago, she'd been engaged. 20 minutes ago, she'd had a future. 20 minutes ago, Richard Pemberton had kissed her forehead with those lying lips and promised he'd return with their tickets. He hadn't returned with tickets. He'd returned with excuses. My family won't accept you, Clara. You must understand. Mother has made arrangements with the Haverford girl. It's been decided since we were children. His voice had been steady, practiced, as if he'd rehearsed the words during the entire journey from Boston. I thought I could defy them, but I can't. I won't. She'd stood there, frozen, as he pressed a $5 bill into her palm. $5. As if that could somehow compensate for the 6 months of promises, the letters written in passionate ink, the plans they'd made for a life together in the West. $5 for her virtue, her trust, her future. There's a boarding house 2 streets over, he'd said, already backing toward the train. Mrs. Wellesley's. It's respectable. You can send word to your aunt in Philadelphia. I'm sure she'll... But Clara had no aunt in Philadelphia. She had no family anywhere, a fact Richard knew perfectly well. She'd been raised in the Boston home for foundling girls, worked as a seamstress in Mrs. Crawford's shop, and met Richard when he'd come in to order shirts. He'd seemed different from other wealthy men, kinder, more genuine. She'd been so catastrophically wrong. Now the train was gone, Richard was gone, and Clara was alone on a platform in a town she'd never heard of until this morning. The $5 bill felt heavy in her gloved hand, weighted with all her shattered dreams. $5 might buy her a week in a boarding house, perhaps 2 if she ate sparingly. And then what? She had no references that would matter in Montana. No skills beyond needlework, and winter was coming to the high plains like an executioner's blade. The platform had emptied quickly after the train departed. The handful of other passengers had been met by family or friends, swept away into wagons and carriages, leaving Clara alone with her small trunk and her devastating new reality. The station master had gone back inside his office, the little pot-bellied stove inside glowing warm and inviting through the frosted window. She should go to that boarding house, she thought distantly. She should move, plan, do something. But her legs felt like lead, and the shame was so thick in her throat she could barely breathe. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have trusted him so completely? Miss? You all right there? The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped her reticule. She spun around to find a woman watching her with concerned brown eyes, a shopping basket over one arm. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair tucked under a sensible hat and a face that spoke of hard work and harder winters. I'm fine, Clara managed, though her voice cracked on the words. Just waiting. The woman's eyes swept over Clara's situation with the quick assessment of someone who'd seen trouble before. The lone trunk, the too-thin coat, the absence of anyone coming to collect her. Waiting for who, honey? Clara's careful composure, held together with pure stubborn will for the past 20 minutes, finally shattered. No one, she whispered. I'm waiting for no one. The tears came then, hot and humiliating, streaming down her frozen cheeks. She tried to turn away to hide her shame, but the woman made a soft sound of sympathy and wrapped a surprisingly strong arm around her shoulders. There now, the woman murmured. Whatever happened, standing here freezing won't fix it. Come on inside the station where it's warm. I'm Martha Hensley, and you look like you need a friend. Mrs. Hensley, for that's who she was, the housekeeper at the Circle W ranch, guided Clara into the station master's office with the gentle firmness of a mother hen. The station master, a grizzled man named Benson, took one look at Clara's tear-stained face and diplomatically found urgent business to attend to in the back room. "Sit," Mrs. Hensley commanded, pushing Clara into a chair near the stove. The warmth felt like absolution. "Now, I'm not going to pry, but I am going to say this. You're not the first girl to get her heart broken in this town, and you won't be the last. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," Clara admitted, pulling off her gloves with shaking fingers. "I have $5, no references that matter out here, and nowhere to go. I thought we were supposed to start a new life together. A ranch," he said. "A home." Mrs. Hensley's expression hardened. "He left you." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded miserably. "With $5. Another nod. Mrs. Hensley said something under her breath that Clara suspected was decidedly unladylike, then sighed. "Well, crying won't fill your belly or put a roof over your head. Can you cook?" Clara blinked at the abrupt shift. "Yes, I learned at the foundling home. Basic cooking, nothing fancy." "Can you clean, mend, follow instructions?" "Yes, all of that." Hensley studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "The Circle W is always looking for help, especially with winter coming. The boss is a good man, fair, decent, doesn't tolerate nonsense. Pays not much, but you'd have a warm place to sleep and 3 meals a day. If you prove yourself useful, it could turn into something permanent." Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered in Clara's chest. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," Mrs. Hensley corrected. "What you make of it is up to you, but I should warn you, it's ranch work. Early mornings, hard days, and no room for delicate sensibilities. You'd be helping me in the house, cooking for the hands, general work. If that sounds like something you can handle, I'll speak to Mr. Warren when he comes to collect me." "Mr. Warren?" "Caleb Warren. He owns the Circle W, inherited it from his father 5 years back." "Good man," Mrs. Hensley repeated, as if that was the highest praise she could bestow. "Lost his wife in childbirth 3 years ago, along with the baby. Hasn't been quite the same since, but he treats his people right. That's worth more than gold out here." Clara's mind raced. This was madness, going to work for a stranger on a ranch she'd never seen, in a place she didn't know. But what were her alternatives? The boarding house and slow starvation? An attempted return to Boston and the certain shame of crawling back to Mrs. Crawford's shop, if she'd even take her back? At least this was work, dignity, survival. "I can handle hard work," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I've been working since I was old enough to hold a needle. I'm not afraid of early mornings or rough conditions. If Mr. Warren is willing to give me a chance, I promise I'll earn my keep." Mrs. Hensley's stern expression softened into something almost approving. "We'll see about that. He should be here within the hour. He had business at the land office. In the meantime, tell me your name and where you're from. If you're going to work at the Circle W, I need to know I'm not bringing trouble to the boss's door." Clara told her story, editing only the most humiliating details. She spoke of growing up in the foundling home, of learning to sew, of meeting Richard and believing his promises of a new life in the West. Mrs. Hensley listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that Mr. Benson had sheepishly provided. "So he was never planning to marry you," Mrs. Hensley said when Clara finished. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "He said he was. He gave me a ring." She pulled the small gold band from her pocket. She'd removed it on the platform, unable to bear the weight of it anymore. "It's real gold. He said it was his grandmother's." Mrs. Hensley examined the ring with a practiced eye. "That'll fetch you maybe $15 in town. More if you're patient. Might consider selling it. That's 3 months' wages for someone in your position." Clara stared at the ring, that symbol of everything she'd believed and lost. Part of her wanted to hurl it into the snow, to be rid of it forever. But the practical part, the part that had kept her alive through 18 years of poverty and uncertainty, recognized the truth in Mrs. Hensley's words. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, tucking the ring back into her pocket. They sat in companionable silence after that, listening to the wind rattle the station windows, and the occasional pop of wood in the stove. Clara felt oddly peaceful, despite the catastrophe of her situation. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was simply the relief of having a plan, even a tentative one. The door opened with a gust of frigid air, and Clara looked up to see a man step inside. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from the Montana mountains themselves. His hat was dusted with snow, his heavy coat open despite the cold, revealing a worn work shirt and suspenders. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention, gray-blue, like a winter sky, carrying a weight of sorrow that seemed to mirror her own. "Mrs. Hensley," he said, his voice deep and quiet. "Sorry to keep you waiting. The land office was backed up." "No trouble, Mr. Warren," Mrs. Hensley said, standing up. "Actually, your timing is perfect. I'd like to introduce you to Miss Clara Hayes. She's found herself in a difficult situation, and I believe she might be the answer to our staffing problems." Caleb Warren's eyes shifted to Clara, and she felt herself being assessed with the same thorough attention he might give a horse he was considering purchasing. She forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, to stand despite her trembling legs, to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "what kind of difficult situation?" Mrs. Hensley glanced at Clara, a question in her eyes. Clara took a deep breath. She could lie, invent some respectable story that would save her pride. But something about Caleb Warren's direct gaze made her choose honesty instead. "I was engaged to be married," she said, her voice steady despite the shame burning in her cheeks. "My fiancé abandoned me here with no explanation beyond the fact that his family expects him to marry someone else. I have $5, no family, and no prospects. Mrs. Hensley suggested you might need help at your ranch." She waited for judgment, for pity, for dismissal. Instead, Caleb Warren's expression darkened with anger. Not at her, she realized, but on her behalf. "He left you here." The quiet fury in his voice was somehow more intimidating than shouting would have been. "Just left you at the station?" "Yes, sir." "With $5? "Yes, sir." He said something under his breath that made Mrs. Hensley raise her eyebrows, then seemed to collect himself. "Can you cook, Miss Hayes?" "Yes, sir. Basic cooking. Stews, bread, roasts, pies. I learned in the foundling home where I was raised." "Can you handle a full day's work? The ranch operates from before dawn until after dark." "I've worked in a seamstress shop since I was 12, sir. 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'm accustomed to hard work." His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her. "This isn't a charitable operation, Miss Hayes. If I hire you, I expect you to earn your wage. Mrs. Hensley's not getting any younger. No offense, Martha. And the house needs attention I can't give it. You'd be cooking for 15 men, cleaning, mending, helping with whatever needs doing. In return, you'd have room and board and $20 a month. If you prove yourself valuable, I'll increase that after 3 months." $20 a month. It was more than she'd made at the seamstress shop, and room and board besides. It was salvation, offered without ceremony or condescension. "I accept," Clara said immediately. "Thank you, Mr. Warren. You won't regret it." "See that I don't." But his tone was gentler than his words, and something in his eyes suggested he understood more than he was saying. He turned to Mrs. Hensley. "Get her trunk. We'll stop by the general store for supplies before we head back. No sense making a separate trip." "I can carry my own trunk, sir," Clara said quickly. Caleb Warren looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "I'm sure you can, Miss Hayes, but you don't have to anymore." He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and headed for the door, and Mrs. Hensley gave Clara an approving nod and followed him out into the cold. Clara stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. 2 hours ago, she'd been abandoned and hopeless. Now she had a job, a home, and a strange, solemn rancher who'd gotten angry on her behalf without her even asking. "Miss Hayes," Caleb Warren's voice called from outside. "You coming?" She grabbed her reticule and hurried out into the snow. The ranch wagon was waiting, pulled by 2 sturdy horses who steamed in the cold. Mrs. Hensley was already seated on the bench, and Caleb was securing Clara's trunk in the back. "Up you go," he said, offering his hand to help her onto the bench. His grip was strong and warm even through her gloves. Clara settled herself next to Mrs. Hensley, tucking her skirts around her legs as Caleb climbed up on the other side. He took the reins with easy competence and urged the horses forward. They rolled down Willow Creek's main street, a modest collection of buildings that spoke of frontier practicality rather than aesthetic ambition, toward the general store. The Circle W is about 45 minutes northeast of town, Mrs. Hensley explained as they rode. 10,000 acres of grazing land with the Yellowstone River cutting through the southern portion. Mr. Warren runs about 500 head of cattle with plans to expand in the spring. The main house is stone and timber, built to last by Mr. Warren's father. There's a bunkhouse for the hands, a barn, stables, and various outbuildings. It's isolated, but it's home. Clara listened, trying to imagine this new life. The city girl in her quailed at the thought of isolation, but another part, the part that had survived 18 years of poverty and hard work, felt a strange stirring of anticipation. This was a fresh start, a blank page. What she wrote on it would be entirely up to her. At the general store, Caleb tied up the horses and helped both women down. "Get whatever you need," he told Clara. "Basic supplies. You'll need warmer clothes than what you're wearing, a proper coat, boots, gloves. Can't have you freezing before you've made your first meal." "I can't afford," Clara began, but he cut her off. "It's an advance on your wages," he said shortly. "Consider it an investment. Can't work if you're sick with cold." Inside the store, Clara found herself overwhelmed by the variety of goods available. Mrs. Hensley proved to be an invaluable guide, selecting items with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew exactly what was needed. A heavy wool coat lined with flannel, leather boots with thick soles, 2 changes of practical work dresses, extra stockings, petticoats, a nightgown, gloves, a scarf, a warm hat. "You'll need these too," Mrs. Hensley said, adding a brush, comb, and some basic toiletries to the growing pile. "And this." She included a small bottle of lavender water, because sometimes smelling nice is the only bit of civilization a woman has out here. Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank me by being good help," Mrs. Hensley replied, but her tone was warm. "Lord knows I need it." When everything was tallied, Caleb paid without comment, though Clara saw him wince slightly at the total. She made a mental note of the amount, $47.60, and silently vowed to work until she'd earned back every penny twice over. As they loaded the supplies into the wagon, the general store owner, a thin man named Patterson, called out to Caleb, "Heard you had more trouble with rustlers last week. Lost any cattle?" Caleb's expression hardened. 20 head. Tracked them to the border before the trail went cold. "That's the 3rd raid this season," Patterson said, shaking his head. "Sheriff doing anything about it?" "Sheriff's doing what he can with a territory this size," Caleb replied evenly. "We'll handle it." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Rustlers, violence. This was a different world from Boston's streets, with different dangers. As they pulled away from the store, Clara worked up the courage to ask, "Is the ranch in danger, sir?" Caleb glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "This is Montana territory, Miss Hayes. Danger's part of the landscape. But I protect what's mine. You'll be safe at the Circle W." The certainty in his voice was oddly comforting. Clara settled back into her seat and watched as they left Willow Creek behind, heading out into the vast Montana wilderness. The landscape was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, endless white plains broken by distant mountains, the sky so huge it seemed to swallow the world. The cold was fierce, making her grateful for the new coat Mrs. Hensley had insisted she put on immediately. Snow began to fall as they traveled, light at first, then heavier, until the world became a swirling white curtain. "Storm's moving in," Caleb observed, urging the horses faster. "We'll make it back before it gets bad." Mrs. Hensley pulled a blanket from under the seat and tucked it around Clara and herself. "Welcome to Montana," she said dryly, "where the weather changes faster than a man's promises." Despite everything, Clara laughed. It felt strange, foreign, but also cleansing. Mrs. Hensley grinned, and even Caleb's stern expression softened slightly. They rode in silence after that, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the jingle of the horses' harnesses, and the whisper of falling snow. Clara found herself studying Caleb Warren from the corner of her eye. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, though his face carried lines of sorrow that aged him beyond what she guessed were his 30-some years. There was something solid about him, something deeply reliable that called to a part of her that had been searching for safety her entire life. "There," Mrs. Hensley said suddenly, pointing ahead. "The Circle W." Through the falling snow, Clara could make out buildings. A large stone and timber house, a massive barn, several outbuildings, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, welcoming and warm. Fences stretched out in various directions, and even through the snow she could see cattle in the near pastures. It was beautiful, more than beautiful. It looked like a home. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the main house and set the brake. "Mrs. Hensley, show Miss Hayes to the spare room upstairs. I'll bring up her trunk and the supplies. Dinner's at 6. That'll give you ladies time to get settled." He climbed down and reached up to help first Mrs. Hensley, then Clara. When Clara's feet touched the ground, her legs nearly buckled from the combination of cold and exhaustion. Caleb's hand steadied her, strong and sure. "Easy," he said quietly. "You've had a hard day." "I'm fine," Clara insisted, though she swayed slightly. "You're exhausted," he corrected, not unkindly. "Martha, take her inside. I'll handle the rest." Mrs. Hensley took Clara's arm and guided her up the porch steps and through the front door. The warmth hit Clara like a physical force, making her realize just how cold she'd been. The interior of the house was rustic but well-maintained. Wood floors, a massive stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and everywhere the signs of a working ranch. "Kitchen's through there," Mrs. Hensley pointed. "Parlor there, study there. Upstairs are the bedrooms, Mr. Warren's room, my room, a spare room that's now yours, and 2 more for guests, though they're rarely used. Bathrooms downstairs off the kitchen. Mr. Warren had indoor plumbing installed last year, which is pure luxury in these parts." She led Clara upstairs to a small but comfortable room with a window overlooking the front yard. There was a bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and bowl, and even a small bookshelf with a few well-worn volumes. "This was Mr. Warren's sister's room," Mrs. Hensley explained. "She married a rancher from Wyoming 3 years back. Visits when she can, but it's a long journey. She won't mind you using it." "It's perfect," Clara said honestly. After years of sharing a dormitory with 30 other girls, then a cramped boarding house room in Boston, this felt like a palace. Caleb appeared in the doorway with her trunk, barely winded despite carrying it up the stairs. He set it down by the dresser with a gentle thump. "Anything else you need, Miss Hayes?" "No, sir, thank you." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Hayes, I want you to understand something. I hired you because I believe you'll be good help, not because I pity you. Your past isn't my concern, only your work. Prove yourself useful and you'll have a place here as long as you want it. Fair enough?" "Fair enough," Clara agreed, throat tight with emotion. "Good. Dinner at 6. He left, his boots heavy on the stairs. Mrs. Hensley gave Clara an approving look. "You'll do all right here, I think. Now wash up and change into something comfortable. I'll show you around the kitchen, and we'll start planning tomorrow's meals. The men eat like horses, so we'll need to get up early to have breakfast ready by 5:30. 5:30? Clara managed not to wince. "Ranch hours, honey. You'll get used to it." Mrs. Hensley patted her arm. "Take 20 minutes to settle yourself, then come down. We've got work to do." Alone at last, Clara sank onto the bed and let herself shake. The enormity of everything that had happened crashed over her like a wave. Richard's betrayal, her desperate situation, the strange kindness of these people who owed her nothing. She pulled out the gold ring from her pocket and stared at it. In Boston, she'd looked at this ring and seen her future. Now she saw only her naivety, but perhaps that was a gift too. She'd learned a hard lesson about trust and promises, but she'd also learned that kindness could come from unexpected places. Rising, Clara went to the window and looked out at the Circle W. Snow was falling harder now, covering everything in white. She could see the barn, the cattle in the distance, the lights starting to glow in the bunkhouse. This was her new life, foreign and frightening and full of possibility. She would make it work. She had to. Clara changed into one of the new work dresses, braided her hair in a simple plait, and washed her face in the cold water from the pitcher. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, She barely recognized herself. The sophisticated Boston lady was gone, replaced by someone harder, more uncertain, but also more determined. Clara Hayes, she told her reflection firmly, you are not going to fail. Not here. Not now. Taking a deep breath, she went downstairs to begin her new life. Mrs. Hensley was waiting in the kitchen, a massive room dominated by a cast-iron stove and a long wooden table. Copper pots hung from hooks, shelves were lined with supplies, and the whole space spoke of serious daily cooking. Good, you're here, Mrs. Hensley said briskly. Let me show you what's what. We keep the staples here: flour, sugar, salt, coffee. These are our spices, though selection's limited this time of year. Root vegetables in the cellar, salted meat in the cold room off the porch, fresh meat when the men butcher. We bake bread every other day, do laundry on Mondays, and generally keep the house running. She opened cupboards, showed Clara where everything was kept, explained the routine. Clara listened intently, memorizing every detail. This was her job now, her purpose, and she would master it. The men eat in the bunkhouse mostly, but they come to the main house for dinner on Sundays and whenever we're doing something special. Today, though, it's just you, me, and Mr. Warren. Simple meal. We've got a beef roast I started this morning, potatoes, carrots, and I thought maybe you could try your hand at biscuits. I can make biscuits, Clara said confidently. It was one of the first things she'd learned at the foundling home. Good, I'll handle the rest. You work on those. For the next hour, Clara lost herself in the familiar rhythm of cooking. Her hands knew the measures without thinking: flour, butter, buttermilk, salt, just a touch of sugar. She kneaded the dough with more force than necessary, working out the tension and fear and confusion of the day. When she cut the biscuits and placed them on the baking sheet, they looked perfect. Mrs. Hensley inspected them with a critical eye. Good work. Into the oven with them. By 6 o'clock, the table was set and the food was ready. Caleb came in from outside, brushing snow from his coat and stomping his boots clean. He'd changed into a fresh shirt and had combed his hair, though it still carried a hint of wildness. Smells good, he said, taking his place at the head of the table. The meal was simple but satisfying. The beef was tender, the vegetables well cooked, and Clara's biscuits earned a grunt of approval from Caleb, which Mrs. Hensley later told her was high praise indeed. They ate in comfortable silence at first. Then Mrs. Hensley began asking Clara questions about Boston, about her life there. Clara answered carefully, sharing enough to be polite, but not so much as to seem self-pitying. Caleb listened more than he spoke, but Clara noticed he seemed to relax slightly as the meal progressed. Miss Hayes, he said as Mrs. Hensley brought out coffee and the dried apple pie she'd made that morning, I want to be clear about the rules of the house. You have your own room and your privacy will be respected. The hands know I don't tolerate any impropriety. You won't be bothered. If anyone does bother you, you tell me immediately. Understood? Yes, sir. You're free to use the parlor, the porch, wherever you like when you're not working. There's a library in my study. You're welcome to borrow books. We have church in town twice a month if you're inclined, and Mrs. Hensley goes to the women's auxiliary meetings. You'd be welcome at those too. Thank you, sir. He studied her for a moment, then seemed satisfied. One more thing. Out here, formality gets tedious. Call me Caleb or Warren if you prefer. I'll call you Clara if that's acceptable. It is Caleb. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate despite the context. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or approval. Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have ledgers to review. Thank you for dinner, ladies. Those biscuits were some of the best I've had, Clara. He left before she could respond, taking his coffee with him. Clara stared after him, confused by the warmth his simple compliment had sparked in her chest. Don't mind him, Mrs. Hensley said, beginning to clear the dishes. He's not used to company, especially female company. His wife's death hit him hard, but he's a good man, like I said, fair and decent, which is more than you can say for most. Clara helped with the dishes, learning the routine, the rhythm of the house. By the time everything was clean and put away, exhaustion hit her like a hammer. Mrs. Hensley took one look at her and shooed her upstairs. Get some sleep, honey. Tomorrow starts early and you'll need your strength. In her new room, Clara unpacked her meager belongings and hung up her new clothes. She sat on the bed and pulled out Richard's ring one more time, studying it in the lamplight. Tomorrow, she decided she would ask Caleb about selling it. She didn't want the money for luxuries. She wanted to pay back what he'd spent on her today. Pride, perhaps, but it mattered to her. As she extinguished the lamp and slipped under the warm quilts, Clara listened to the sounds of her new home. Wind against the windows, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of floorboards as Caleb moved around downstairs. These were different sounds than Boston's constant noise, but they weren't frightening. They were real, solid, honest. She'd been abandoned at a frozen train station with nothing but broken promises. But somehow, impossibly, she'd landed here, in a warm bed, in a real home, with work to do, and people who treated her with dignity. As sleep claimed her, Clara's last thought was that perhaps, just perhaps, Richard Pemberton had actually done her a favor. She'd wanted a new life in the West. She'd just found it, though not at all in the way she'd expected. And tomorrow she would start proving that she deserved it. The rooster's crow pierced Clara's dreamless sleep like a bugle call to battle. For one disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was too soft, the air too cold, the darkness too complete. Then memory flooded back. Montana, the Circle W. Her new life as a ranch hand's helper rather than a rancher's wife. She fumbled for matches on the bedside table and lit the lamp with shaking fingers. The small clock Mrs. Hensley had left for her showed 4:30 in the morning. Outside her window, the world was still black as pitch, though she could hear sounds from the barn, men's voices, the clang of metal, horses whinnying their protests at being disturbed so early. Clara dressed quickly in one of her new work dresses, braided her hair, and splashed icy water on her face from the pitcher. The cold shocked her fully awake, which was probably the point. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she made her way downstairs, following the glow of lamplight to the kitchen. Mrs. Hensley was already there, moving around the kitchen with the efficient precision of long practice. She'd started a fire in the massive stove, and the room was beginning to warm. Coffee was already perking in a huge pot on the stovetop, filling the air with its rich aroma. "Morning," Mrs. Hensley said without turning around. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Clara rolled up her sleeves. "What do you need me to do?" "Get the bacon started. There's a slab in the cold room. We'll need about 3 pounds for the men, plus whatever we want for ourselves and Mr. Warren. I'll start the pancake batter. Check that the coffee doesn't boil over while you're at it." Clara found her way to the cold room, a small shed off the back porch where meat and other perishables were kept. The frigid air made her gasp, but she located the bacon quickly and hurried back inside. Within minutes, she had strips sizzling in 2 large cast-iron skillets, the smell making her stomach growl despite her nervousness. For the next hour, the kitchen became a choreographed dance of organized chaos. Mrs. Hensley mixed enormous bowls of pancake batter while Clara fried bacon, scrambled 24 eggs, and sliced bread for toasting. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by terse instructions. "Hand me that bowl. Check the bacon. More coffee." At precisely 5:30, the back door opened and men began filing in, ranch hands, dusty and weathered, smelling of horses and leather and hard work. They removed their hats respectfully and took their places at the long table in what was clearly an established routine. Clara felt their curious eyes on her as she helped Mrs. Hensley carry out platters of food. She kept her gaze down, focused on her work, but she could hear the whispers. "That the new girl? Where'd she come from?" "Boss hired her yesterday, I heard. Found her at the station." "Pretty little thing. Wonder how long she'll last." "Long enough if she can cook like this. Pass the bacon." The men ate with single-minded intensity, barely speaking except to request more food. Clara and Mrs. Hensley kept the platters full, the coffee flowing, moving back and forth between kitchen and dining room like well-oiled machinery. Caleb appeared just as the hands were finishing up, looking as alert and composed as if he'd had a full night's sleep rather than whatever scant hours he'd managed. He nodded to Clara, took his place at the head of the table, and accepted the plate she nervously set before him. "Men," he said, his quiet voice somehow carrying authority, "this is Clara Hayes. She'll be helping Mrs. Hensley with the house and cooking. You'll treat her with respect or you'll find employment elsewhere. Clear?" A chorus of "yes, boss," and "understood" rippled around the table. Caleb took a bite of his breakfast, chewed thoughtfully, then looked up at Clara. "Good eggs. Better than mine." It was a small compliment, delivered matter-of-factly, but Clara felt ridiculously pleased. Thank you. The hands finished eating and filed out to begin their day, each one nodding politely to Clara as they passed. The last to leave was an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes who paused at the door. Tom Redding, ma'am, he said, touching his hat. I'm the foreman. If you need anything heavy moved or any trouble handled, you let me know. Thank you, Mr. Redding. Just Redding, ma'am. Everyone here's just one name. He grinned and headed out into the pre-dawn darkness. Caleb lingered over his coffee, watching Clara and Mrs. Hensley clean up. Clara, when you're finished here, I'd like to show you around the property. You should know the layout, where everything is, where not to go, that sort of thing. Of course. Clara's heart beat a little faster at the prospect of time alone with him. Not that it meant anything. He was just being thorough, making sure she knew her way around. Still, something about Caleb Warren made her nervous in a way that had nothing to do with fear. An hour later, bundled in her new coat and boots, Clara followed Caleb out into the cold morning. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern horizon with streaks of gold and pink, illuminating the vast landscape in shades of white and blue. Snow had fallen heavily during the night, covering everything in pristine drifts. The main house, you know, Caleb said, gesturing back at the stone and timber structure behind them. Barn's there. That's where we keep the horses we use daily, plus storage for tack, tools, feed. The stable's separate. They're behind it. That's for breeding stock and the horses we're training. Smokehouse is that small building. Root cellar's got an entrance in the house, but there's an outside entrance too in case the house entrance is blocked. He walked as he talked, his long strides eating up ground. Clara had to hurry to keep up. He seemed to notice and slowed his pace slightly, though whether out of consideration or impatience, she couldn't tell. Bunkhouse is there, he continued, pointing to a long, low building with smoke rising from its chimney. That's where the hands sleep and take their meals most days. You won't need to go there. They come to the house for Sunday dinners and special occasions, but otherwise they're self-sufficient. My father built it that way deliberately. Helps maintain proper boundaries. Clara nodded, filing away the information. How many men work here? 15 year-round, more during spring and fall. Roundup, branding, that sort of thing requires extra hands. Most of the men have been here for years. They're good workers, loyal. A few are young, still learning. I expect them all to be respectful, but if anyone steps out of line, you tell me immediately. Understood? Yes. They walked the perimeter of the main compound, Caleb pointing out various buildings and features. The blacksmith's forge, the equipment shed, the chicken coop where Clara would be gathering eggs daily, the well house. Everything was well maintained, organized, efficient, a reflection of Caleb himself, she realized. Beyond the immediate compound, we've got 10,000 acres, Caleb said as they paused on a slight rise that overlooked the property. Grazing land mostly, with good water from the Yellowstone cutting through the southern section. We run cattle, Herefords primarily, some crossbreeds, good beef stock. In a few years, if the market holds and we can expand the herd, this ranch will be one of the most profitable in the territory. There was pride in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Clara studied his profile as he looked out over his land, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind, the way his shoulders squared as if bearing invisible weight. Your father built this, she said softly. He did. Came out here in '58. Bought the land for next to nothing. Spent 20 years building it into something worthwhile. When he died 5 years ago, I inherited not just the land, but the responsibility to everyone who depends on it. The men, their families, the people in town who rely on our business. It's not just a ranch. It's an obligation. Clara heard something in his voice. Duty, yes, but also a hint of burden. Do you ever resent it? He looked at her sharply, as if surprised by the question. No, this land is in my blood. I just wish... He trailed off, his expression closing. Wish what? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, I wish my father had lived to see what it's become. I wish my wife had lived to share it with me. I wish a lot of things, but wishing doesn't change anything. Work does. Persistence does. Getting up every morning and doing what needs to be done, that's what matters. It was the most personal thing he'd said to her, and Clara felt honored by the trust it implied. Your wife, Mrs. Hensley mentioned she died in childbirth. Sarah, 3 years ago, this December. His voice was carefully neutral, but his hands clenched briefly at his sides. She was 22. We'd been married 2 years. The doctor said sometimes it just happens. The baby was positioned wrong, labor went on too long. By the time we realized how bad it was, there was nothing anyone could do. Lost them both. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. But the way he said it suggested it might as well have been yesterday. They stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher, painting the snow-covered land in shades of rose and gold. Clara felt the cold seeping through her boots, but didn't want to break the moment. There was something peaceful about standing here with Caleb, sharing his view of the world he'd built and maintained against all odds. Your fiancé, Caleb said abruptly. What was his name? Richard Pemberton. Did you love him? The question was direct, almost harsh. Clara considered lying, offering the expected answer, but something about this place, this man, demanded honesty. I thought I did. Now I think I loved the idea of him, the security he represented, the promise of a home, a family, belonging somewhere. I spent 18 years in a foundling home, never knowing where I came from or if anyone had ever wanted me. Richard offered me an identity, a place in the world. That was intoxicating. Caleb nodded slowly. I understand that. Wanting to belong. Do you? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw depths of loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. I belonged to this land my whole life, but after Sarah died, I realized you can belong to a place without belonging to anyone. That's a different kind of loneliness. Before Clara could respond, the moment was broken by shouting from the direction of the barn. Caleb's head snapped around, his body tensing with instant alertness. Stay here, he ordered, already moving toward the commotion. But Clara followed anyway, her shorter legs struggling through the snow. By the time she reached the barn, Caleb was already inside with several of his men clustered around something on the ground. As she got closer, she could see a young ranch hand, barely more than a boy, lying in the straw, his face pale, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. Horse spooked and kicked him, Redding was explaining. Caught him right in the shin. Pretty sure it's broken. Caleb was already kneeling beside the boy, his hands gentle but firm as he examined the injury. Jamie, can you hear me? Hurts like hell, boss, the boy gasped. I know. We need to splint it before we move you. Redding, get me 2 boards and some rope. Someone ride to town for Doc Anderson. Tell him it's urgent. The men scrambled to follow orders. Clara pushed her way through the circle and knelt on the other side of the injured boy. I can help. Caleb's eyes met hers. You've done this before? I worked with the nurse at the foundling home sometimes. I know how to set a splint, clean wounds, basic care. He studied her for a brief moment, then nodded. All right. Talk to him while I work. Keep him calm. While Caleb and Redding fashioned a splint for Jamie's broken leg, Clara held the boy's hand and kept up a steady stream of soothing words. She asked him about his family, his home, how long he'd worked at the Circle W, anything to keep his mind off the pain. When Caleb had to manipulate the leg to set the splint properly, Jamie screamed, his hand crushing Clara's, but she held on and kept talking. By the time they'd carried Jamie into the house and settled him on the sofa in the parlor, Clara's dress was covered in blood and straw. Her hands were shaking, and her voice was hoarse. Mrs. Hensley appeared with blankets and hot water, and together they made Jamie as comfortable as possible while they waited for the doctor. You did good, Caleb said quietly, catching Clara in the hallway. Most women would have fainted or run. I'm not most women, Clara replied, then flushed at how that sounded. I mean, I've seen worse at the foundling home. Children with fevers, injuries from factory work, all sorts of things. You learn to be useful or you're useless. Something like respect flickered across Caleb's face. Still, thank you. Doc Anderson arrived 3 hours later, a grizzled man who smelled of whiskey and tobacco, but whose hands were steady and competent. He examined Jamie's leg, pronounced Caleb's field splinting adequate, and dosed the boy with laudanum before setting the break properly. Clara assisted, handing him instruments and holding Jamie still when necessary. The doctor raised an eyebrow at her competence, but said nothing. He'll need to stay off that leg for at least 6 weeks, Doc Anderson said as he washed his hands in the kitchen basin. Maybe longer. Boy's young. He'll heal, but he won't be much use to you this winter, Warren. He'll have a place here as long as he needs, Caleb said firmly. We take care of our own. The doctor left, and Clara helped Mrs. Hensley prepare a light lunch, while Caleb arranged for Jamie to be moved to one of the spare bedrooms upstairs. The boy was drowsy from the laudanum, barely conscious as two of the hands carried him up, but he managed to whisper a thank you to Clara as they passed. That evening, after another massive meal for the hands and hours of cleaning up, Clara finally collapsed in her room. Every muscle ached, her hands were raw from scrubbing, and she was so tired she could barely think. But there was something deeply satisfying about the exhaustion. It was honest work, productive work, work that mattered. A soft knock on her door made her look up. Come in. Caleb entered, looking uncomfortable in the intimate setting of her bedroom. He stayed in the doorway, carefully proper. I wanted to thank you again for today. Jamie's leg could have been much worse if you hadn't helped keep him calm. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. His voice was firm. You've been here one day and you've already proven yourself invaluable. I want you to know that I see that, and I appreciate it. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire downstairs. Thank you, Caleb. That means a lot. He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Clara, that ring you mentioned yesterday, the one your fiancé gave you, are you planning to keep it? No, I'd like to sell it actually. I want to pay you back for the clothes and supplies. That's not necessary. It's necessary to me, Clara interrupted gently. I don't want charity. I want to earn my place here honestly. Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I respect that. There's a jeweler in town, Morris Goldstein. Fair man, won't cheat you. I'll take you to him next week when I go in for supplies. Thank you. After he left, Clara pulled out the ring and looked at it one last time. She felt nothing. No regret, no sadness, just a mild curiosity that she'd ever attached so much meaning to such a small piece of metal. Tomorrow she would put it away and forget about it until they went to town. Tonight, she would sleep the sleep of the exhausted and useful. The days that followed established a rhythm that Clara found herself settling into with surprising ease. Wake before dawn, help Mrs. Hensley prepare breakfast for the hands, clean up, prepare midday meal, clean up, prepare evening meal, clean up. In between, there were eggs to gather, bread to bake, clothes to mend, floors to sweep, and 100 other tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. Jamie proved to be an easy patient, cheerful despite his pain, grateful for every meal Clara brought him. She found herself spending time in his room, chatting while he ate, learning about life on the ranch from his enthusiastic, if somewhat rambling stories. Been here since I was 14, he told her one afternoon as she changed the bandages on his leg. My pa died, left Ma with 5 kids and no money. Mr. Warren heard about it somehow, came to our place and offered me work. Said he'd pay me full wages, give Ma a monthly allowance until the younger ones were old enough to work. Saved our family, he did. He seems like a good man, Clara observed carefully. Best I've ever known, Jamie said fervently. Tough, but fair. Works harder than any of us. And after Miss Sarah died, he trailed off, suddenly looking uncomfortable. What about after she died? Well, he just sort of closed up, if you know what I mean. Used to smile more, laugh sometimes. Miss Sarah was like sunshine, always singing, always happy. After we lost her, the light went out of him. He does his duty, takes care of everyone, but it's like he's just going through motions. Clara thought about this as she finished with the bandages. She'd seen glimpses of the man Jamie described, flashes of dry humor, moments of unexpected kindness, the way his eyes softened when he looked at his land. But there was a wall around Caleb Warren, built of grief and duty and loneliness. She understood walls. She'd built plenty of her own. On Friday afternoon, Caleb kept his promise and took Clara to town to sell the ring. The ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Clara found herself studying the landscape, noting landmarks, beginning to feel a strange sense of ownership over this vast, empty territory. Morris Goldstein's shop was a small, neat establishment on Willow Creek's main street. The proprietor was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and gentle eyes who examined the ring under a jeweler's loupe with practiced precision. It's real gold, he confirmed. About 1/2 carat diamond. Decent quality. I can give you $35 for it. Clara's heart sank. She'd hoped for more, enough to cover all her expenses, plus a little extra. $35 would barely cover half of what Caleb had spent on her supplies. She'll take 40, Caleb said from where he leaned against the counter. Goldstein looked up, startled. Mr. Warren, with all respect, the piece is worth 35 at most. And with all respect, Morris, I've sold you enough jewelry over the years to know you'll turn this around for 60 at least. 40's fair. The jeweler sighed, but nodded. 40 it is. He counted out the bills and handed them to Clara. Always a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Warren. Outside, Clara turned to Caleb. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Goldstein's honest, but he's also a businessman. Would have paid you less because you're a woman who needed the money quickly. That's not fair. Clara looked down at the $40 in her hand, more money than she'd ever held at one time in her life. I want to pay you back for the supplies now. Clara, please, I need to do this. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. $20 then. That'll cover most of it. She handed him 20 of the bills, feeling simultaneously lighter and more grounded. The remaining 20 she tucked carefully into her reticule. It was a cushion, security, proof that she was building something here. They made their way to the general store for supplies, and Clara found herself relaxing into easy conversation with Caleb as they selected items. He asked her opinion on which coffee blend to buy, whether they needed more sugar, what vegetables she thought they should stock for winter. Small things, domestic things. But they made her feel included, valued. At the dry goods counter, Clara's eye caught on a bolt of dark blue fabric, simple but good quality. She could make herself another dress from it, replace the one she'd left behind in Boston, but it would cost nearly half her remaining money. Go ahead, Caleb said, noticing her hesitation. Get what you need. I shouldn't spend the money. You earned it. Besides, can't have you wearing the same 2 dresses until they fall apart. Get the fabric, get thread, needles, whatever else you need. Clara did, feeling recklessly extravagant. She also bought a small journal and a pencil. She wanted to start recording recipes, household notes, maybe even her thoughts. The girl who'd arrived at Willow Creek Station 6 days ago seemed like a different person, someone from a half-remembered dream. As they loaded the supplies into the wagon, a woman's voice called out, "Caleb Warren, is that you?" They turned to see an elegantly dressed woman approaching, her smile wide and calculating. She was perhaps 30, beautiful in a hard sort of way, with blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that assessed Clara with instant dislike. "Victoria?" Caleb said, his voice cooling noticeably. "I didn't know you were in town." "Just returned from Denver. The shopping there is so much better than our provincial little offerings." Her gaze slid to Clara. "And who is this? I don't believe we've been introduced." "Clara Hayes, this is Victoria Ashford. Her father owns the ranch adjacent to mine. Clara is working at the Circle W, helping Mrs. Hensley." Victoria's smile turned condescending. "A servant. How practical. Tell me, Miss Hayes, are you from around here? Your clothes suggest otherwise." Clara felt her spine stiffen. "I'm from Boston. I arrived last week." "Boston? How exotic. Whatever brought you to this wilderness?" "A change of circumstances," Clara said evenly, refusing to be baited. "Indeed." Victoria turned her attention back to Caleb, effectively dismissing Clara. "Caleb, Father is having a dinner party next Saturday. Just a small gathering, the Harrisons, the Coles, Judge Whitmore. We'd love for you to attend. It's been far too long since you've socialized properly." "I appreciate the invitation, but I'll have to decline. It's a busy season." "It's always a busy season with you," Victoria pouted prettily. "You can't hide away on that ranch forever grieving. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that." Caleb's expression turned glacial. "Don't presume to tell me what my wife would have wanted." Victoria had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I apologize. I only meant that life goes on, and you deserve happiness again. There are several lovely young ladies who would be honored. I'm not interested. Good day, Victoria." Caleb took Clara's arm and steered her toward the wagon with barely controlled anger. They rode in tense silence for several minutes before Caleb finally spoke. "I apologize for that. Victoria means well, but she doesn't know when to leave things alone." "She seemed very concerned about your happiness," Clara ventured carefully. Caleb snorted. Victoria's concerned about securing a profitable alliance between our properties. Her father's ranch is failing, and she thinks marrying me would solve all their problems. I've made it clear I'm not interested, but she persists. I see. Clara kept her voice neutral, though something uncomfortable twisted in her stomach at the thought of Caleb married to someone like Victoria. You handled her well, Caleb said after another pause. Standing up for yourself without being rude, that takes skill. I learned early that the only person who'd defend me was me. The foundling home taught me that much. Tell me about it, Caleb said suddenly. The foundling home. What was it like? Clara was surprised by the question, by his apparent genuine interest. It was institutional, clean, well-run, but cold. We had dormitories with 30 beds, strict schedules, mandatory work assignments. The matrons weren't cruel, but they weren't warm either. We were fed, clothed, educated in basic reading and arithmetic, and trained for employment. When we turned 16, we were expected to find positions and leave. Most of the girls went into domestic service or factory work. I was lucky. I had a talent for needlework, and Mrs. Crawford hired me. No family at all? None that I know of. I was left at the home as an infant, wrapped in a gray blanket with no note, no explanation. They named me Clara because it means clear. I suppose they hoped my future would be. The surname Hayes came from the woman who found me on the doorstep. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. That must have been hard, never knowing where you came from. Sometimes, Clara admitted. Mostly I just accepted it. You can't miss what you never had. But I envied the other girls who had stories, even sad ones. At least they knew they'd been wanted once, even if circumstances changed. I never had even that much certainty. You were wanted, Caleb said firmly. Maybe not by your birth parents, but Mrs. Crawford wanted you. Mrs. Hensley wants you. I want you here. You're building your own story now, Clara. The past doesn't have to define it. Something warm and fragile bloomed in Clara's chest. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. They drove on through the winter landscape, and Clara felt something shift between them. A tentative connection, the beginning of friendship, perhaps. Or maybe something more dangerous, something she had no right to want but couldn't quite suppress. That night, as she sat in her room writing in her new journal by lamplight, Clara found herself writing not about the past, but about the future. About the ranch, the rhythm of work, the satisfaction of tired muscles, and accomplished tasks. About Mrs. Hensley's gruff kindness and Jamie's cheerful resilience. About the vast Montana sky and the way the snow sparkled under moonlight. And about Caleb Warren, the complicated, grieving, fiercely protective man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing. She didn't write about the way her heart beat faster when he entered a room, or how his rare smiles made her feel like she'd accomplished something extraordinary. Those feelings were too new, too fragile, too dangerous to examine too closely. Instead, she wrote, I think I might be building a home here. Not the one I imagined, but maybe the one I needed all along. Downstairs, the house settled into nighttime quiet, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the moon. Clara closed her journal, extinguished her lamp, and settled under her quilts with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. And if her last waking thought was of gray-blue eyes and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, well, that was her secret to keep. Winter settled over the Circle W like a heavy blanket, bringing with it the kind of cold that made Clara's bones ache and her breath freeze in the air. November bled into December, and with each passing week, Clara found herself more deeply woven into the fabric of ranch life. The early mornings no longer felt brutal, the endless cooking and cleaning became routine, and the vast Montana landscape that had once terrified her now felt almost like home. Jamie's leg was healing well, and he'd graduated from bed rest to hobbling around on crutches, insisting on making himself useful despite Mrs. Hensley's protests. Clara often found him in the kitchen, peeling potatoes one-handed or entertaining them with stories about the ranch hands and their various escapades. The boy had become something like a younger brother to her, filling a space in her heart she hadn't known was empty. Caleb remained a mystery wrapped in quiet strength and carefully controlled emotion. They'd fallen into an easy pattern of conversation over meals, discussing ranch business, the weather, occasionally sharing stories from their pasts. Clara learned that he'd been raised on this land, that his mother had died when he was 12, that his father had been a hard man, but a fair one. Caleb spoke rarely of Sarah, but when he did, his voice carried a tenderness that made Clara's chest ache with something she refused to name as jealousy. She was simply grateful to be here, she told herself firmly. Grateful for the work, the home, the security. Anything else was foolishness, the kind of romantic delusion that had already ruined her life once. She would not make that mistake again. But then Caleb would smile at something she said, or his hand would brush hers as he reached for the coffee pot, and her traitorous heart would stutter in her chest like a startled bird. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a rider from town who'd fought through a light snowstorm to reach the ranch. Clara was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the commotion at the front door. Through the window, she watched Caleb tear open the envelope, his expression darkening as he read. When he came into the kitchen, his face was drawn with worry. "My mother's taken ill, pneumonia. My sister says it's serious." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Clara had learned meant he was deeply troubled. "I need to go to Tennessee. I don't know how long I'll be gone. Could be a week, could be a month." "Of course you must go," Mrs. Hensley said immediately. "Your mother needs you." "But the ranch will be fine," the housekeeper said firmly. "Redding's been foreman for 15 years. He knows what needs doing. Claire and I can handle the house, and the men know their jobs. Your mother won't recover if you're here worrying instead of there helping." Caleb looked at Clara, something unreadable in his eyes. "You'll be all right?" The question felt weighted with more than surface concern. "I'll be fine. We all will. Go take care of your mother." He nodded slowly, then began issuing rapid instructions. Redding was summoned and given detailed orders about which cattle to move, what repairs to prioritize, how to handle any problems that might arise. Mrs. Hensley received instructions about household accounts and where various documents were kept. To Clara, he said simply, "Keep things running smoothly. If there's trouble, Redding will handle it. If there's anything you need, anything at all, send word to town and they'll get a telegram to me." Within 2 hours, he was packed and gone, riding hard for the train station with barely a backward glance. Clara stood on the porch and watched until he disappeared into the white landscape, feeling strangely bereft. The ranch suddenly seemed larger, emptier, colder without his steady presence. "He'll be back," Mrs. Hensley said quietly beside her. Caleb Warren always comes back to what's his. Clara wasn't sure if the housekeeper meant the ranch or something else entirely. The first week passed without incident. Clara threw herself into work with renewed intensity, as if constant motion could fill the absence Caleb had left behind. She baked extra bread, reorganized the pantry, mended every piece of clothing that needed attention, and spent hours teaching Jamie to read better from the books in Caleb's study. The hands noticed their boss's absence but continued their work with professional dedication. Redding proved to be an excellent foreman, running the daily operations with calm efficiency. He checked in with Mrs. Hensley each evening to report on the day's progress and confirm there were no problems. "Moved the cattle to the south pasture like the boss wanted," he'd say, accepting a cup of coffee. "Fixed that loose board in the barn. Young Tucker's showing real promise with the horses. All's well." Clara began to relax. Perhaps this wouldn't be so difficult after all. The telegram came on the 8th day. Caleb's mother had taken a turn for the worse. He needed to stay at least another 2 weeks, possibly longer. He trusted them to manage without him. The message was brief, impersonal, necessary. But Clara found herself reading it over and over, searching for something more personal between the lines. "He's worried about her," Mrs. Hensley observed, watching Clara fold the telegram carefully. "His mother's a good woman. Raised him right after his father got too focused on the ranch to notice he had a son who needed attention." "How long were they married? His parents?" 30 years before she passed. No, wait, I'm thinking of someone else. Caleb's mother is still alive, dear. That's who he's gone to see. His father's the one who died 5 years back." Mrs. Hensley shook her head. "My memory's not what it was. But yes, they were married a long time. Not always happily, but they stuck it out. That's what people did in those days." Clara thought about that as she went about her chores, sticking it out even when happiness faded. She'd grown up believing marriage should be based on love, on partnership, on mutual respect. But maybe that was naive. Maybe marriage was just another form of survival, two people bound together by necessity rather than affection. The thought depressed her more than it should have. On the 10th day, the temperature dropped so precipitously that water froze in the pipes, and the hands had to break ice on the water troughs 3 times a day. Clara wore 2 pairs of stockings under her dress and still felt cold down to her bones. The kitchen became the warmest room in the house, and she found herself lingering there even after the cleaning was done, just to feel the heat from the massive stove. Jamie had graduated to a cane and was helping more around the house, his youthful energy a welcome distraction. He'd taken to following Clara around like a devoted puppy, chattering constantly about everything and nothing. "Think the boss will be back for Christmas?" he asked one afternoon as he helped her fold laundry. "I don't know. His mother's very ill." "Sure would be sad spending Christmas without him. He always does a big dinner for everyone, gives each hand a bonus. Last year he even got us peppermint sticks from town." Jamie's face fell. "Of course, Miss Sarah used to help with the decorating and such. Made the whole house look like something from a picture book. After she died, Christmas got quieter. But it was still nice, you know?" Clara felt a pang of sympathy for this younger version of Caleb, trying to maintain traditions while grief hollowed him out from the inside. "We'll make sure Christmas is special this year," she promised, "even if Caleb can't be here." Jamie brightened immediately. "Really? You'd do that?" "Of course, everyone deserves a good Christmas." She regretted the promise almost immediately when she realized she had no idea how to create a good Christmas for 15 ranch hands and 2 household staff. The foundling home had observed the holiday with a sparse church service and a slightly better meal than usual. Mrs. Crawford had given her employees an extra day off. Clara had no experience with the kind of celebration Jamie described, but she'd promised, and Clara Hayes kept her promises. She enlisted Mrs. Hensley's help, and together they began planning. There would be a special meal: roasted beef, potatoes, vegetables, pies, cakes, whatever they could manage with their limited supplies. They'd decorate the house with pine branches and berries from the woods. Clara would make small gifts for each hand, useful things like warm socks or mended shirts. "You've got a kind heart," Mrs. Hensley observed as they made lists. "That's going to serve you well out here, or hurt you badly. Haven't decided which yet." "Why would kindness hurt?" "Because this is a hard land, dear. It takes more than it gives. You care about people, you're going to lose them. To accidents, to illness, to the simple fact that nothing lasts forever out here." Caleb learned that lesson with Sarah. Nearly broke him. Clara thought about that conversation as she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the house. She understood what Mrs. Hensley meant. Caring made you vulnerable, gave fate something to take away. But the alternative was shutting yourself off from connection, living like Caleb did, performing duty without joy. That seemed worse than any pain loss might bring. She'd rather feel everything and risk heartbreak than feel nothing at all. The 14th day brought a blizzard that lasted 3 days straight, trapping everyone inside and making even the short walk to the barn treacherous. The hands took turns checking on the cattle, coming back crusted with ice and barely able to feel their fingers. Clara and Mrs. Hensley kept coffee and soup going constantly, providing warmth and sustenance to the half-frozen men. On the second night of the storm, as Clara was banking the fire in the kitchen stove before bed, she heard shouting from outside. She ran to the window and saw through the driving snow a group of riders approaching the house. But these weren't their men returning from chores. These were strangers sitting their horses with aggressive postures, their faces hidden by scarves and hats. Redding burst through the kitchen door, snow flying. "Clara, get Mrs. Hensley and Jamie and go upstairs. Lock yourselves in a bedroom and don't come out until I say." "What's happening?" "Just do it. Now!" The urgency in his voice sent Clara running. She found Mrs. Hensley already herding Jamie toward the stairs, the older woman's face grim. They locked themselves in Clara's room, and Jamie positioned himself by the window despite Mrs. Hensley's protests. "I can see what's happening," he whispered. 6 riders. They're talking to Redding and the boys. Can't hear what they're saying, but oh no, oh no. "What?" Clara moved to the window despite her fear. Below, one of the riders had dismounted and was gesturing angrily at Redding. Even from this distance, Clara could see the tension in the foreman's body, the way the other ranch hands had positioned themselves protectively. This was about to turn violent. It happened fast. The rider swung at Redding, who ducked and returned the blow. Suddenly, all 6 riders were dismounting, and a full brawl erupted in the snow. Clara watched in horror as fists flew, men grappled, and the peaceful ranch yard became a battlefield. Then she saw one of the strangers pull a gun. "No!" The word tore from her throat even though no one could hear her. She watched, frozen, as the stranger aimed at Redding, his finger tightening on the trigger. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from the stranger's gun. It was from the house. Clara spun to see Jamie by the door, Caleb's rifle in his hands, his face pale but determined. "I shot over their heads," he said shakily, "just to scare them. We can't let them kill Redding." The effect was immediate. The strangers broke off fighting and scrambled for their horses. Within seconds, they were riding away into the storm, shouting threats that were lost in the wind. Clara's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the floor. Mrs. Hensley was already downstairs and Clara could hear her shouting for Redding. Jamie limped after her, still clutching the rifle. By the time Clara made it downstairs on trembling legs, the kitchen was organized chaos. 3 of the ranch hands were injured. Nothing life-threatening, but there was blood on the floor and torn clothing and the acrid smell of violence. Redding had a split lip and what would be a spectacular black eye, but he was directing the others with calm authority. "Someone ride to the Monroe Ranch. See if they'll spare a couple men for a few days," he was saying. "We need extra security until the boss gets back. Those were the Fletcher brothers, and they'll be back." "Fletcher brothers?" Clara forced her voice to work. "Who are they?" Redding looked at her with something like respect. "Rustlers. They're the ones been stealing our cattle. We killed their youngest brother when we caught him in the act back in October. They've been threatening revenge ever since." Cold fear washed through Clara. "They'll come back." "Yes, ma'am, they will. That's why we need to be ready." The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. The hands from the Monroe Ranch arrived. 4 grim-faced men who set up a rotating watch schedule. Windows were shuttered at night, firearms cleaned and loaded, ammunition counted. The bunkhouse became an armed camp and the house was locked up tight after dark. Clara tried to maintain normalcy, cooking meals and keeping the household running, but fear sat like a stone in her stomach. Every sound made her jump, every shadow seemed threatening. She found herself thinking constantly of Caleb, wishing desperately that he were here, hating herself for the weakness of that wish. On the 3rd night after the attack, Clara was in the kitchen cleaning up from dinner when she heard horses approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat until she heard Redding's voice calling out a greeting. She ran to the window and saw through the darkness a familiar tall figure dismounting from an exhausted horse. Caleb was back. She wanted to run outside, to throw herself into his arms with relief, but she forced herself to stay in the kitchen, hands gripping the edge of the sink until her knuckles were white. She heard the front door open, heard Redding's rapid explanation, heard Caleb's voice, tight with fury, demanding details. Then he was in the kitchen doorway, his eyes finding her immediately. He looked exhausted, covered in trail dust, his face drawn with worry and anger. But when he saw her standing there safe and whole, something in his expression cracked. Clara. She meant to say something calm and sensible, to report on the household situation like a good employee. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "You came back." "Of course I came back." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and before Clara could process what was happening, he'd pulled her into a fierce embrace. "When I got the telegram about the attack, I rode day and night to get here. Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No, I'm fine. We locked ourselves upstairs like Redding said. Jamie fired a warning shot and they ran." Clara's voice was muffled against his chest, and she realized she was shaking. "I was so scared." His arms tightened around her. "I know. I'm sorry I wasn't here. I should have been here. Your mother is recovering. My sister can handle the rest. My place is here, protecting what's mine." His voice dropped to something almost fierce. "Protecting you." Clara pulled back enough to look up at him, her heart hammering. The expression in his eyes made her breath catch. It was raw, unguarded, full of an emotion she didn't dare name. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Then Redding's voice from the hallway broke the spell. "Boss, we need to talk strategy." Caleb released her slowly, his hands lingering on her arms. "We'll continue this later," he said quietly. "But Clara, I'm glad you're safe. Very glad." He left to confer with his men, and Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen, her whole body trembling with reaction. Mrs. Hensley appeared from the pantry, her expression knowing. "Told you he'd come back," was all she said. That night, the house felt different with Caleb in it. Safer, more solid, more complete. Clara lay in her bed listening to the sound of male voices downstairs as he and Redding planned their defense, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe properly. But sleep proved elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the Fletcher brothers riding out of the storm, saw the gun aimed at Redding, heard Jamie's rifle shot echoing through the night. She'd been so afraid, not just for herself, but for everyone on the ranch, these people who'd become something like family. Around midnight, unable to stand the tossing and turning anymore, Clara wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and crept downstairs for warm milk. She found Caleb in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a ledger open in front of him, though he didn't seem to be looking at the numbers. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He looked up, and in the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face. "Too much to think about. How to protect everyone, how to end this without more bloodshed, whether I should contact the territorial marshal or handle it ourselves." He rubbed his eyes. "And my mother. Leaving her was one of the hardest things I've ever done, even knowing my sister was there." Clara poured herself some milk and sat down across from him. "Is she going to be all right?" "The doctor thinks so. The crisis has passed, but she's not young anymore, and pneumonia takes a toll." His voice was heavy with worry and guilt. "You can go back to her if you need to. We'll manage here." "No." The word was firm, final. "I'm not leaving again, not with the Fletcher brothers making threats, not with you in danger." There it was again, that possessive note in his voice when he spoke of her safety. Clara's pulse quickened. "Caleb, I'm just an employee. You don't have to—" "You're not just an employee." He looked at her directly, his gray-blue eyes intense in the lamplight. "You stopped being just an employee weeks ago, Clara. I thought you knew that." Her mouth went dry. "Then what am I?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then quietly, "I don't know yet. But I know I couldn't breathe properly until I saw you safe tonight. I know I rode 3 horses nearly to death getting back here because the thought of you in danger made me half crazy. I know that when I held you earlier, it felt like the first time in 3 years that anything made sense." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. Sarah's gone." Pain flashed across his face, but his voice remained steady. "I loved her, and I'll always love her memory. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of just existing without living. You make me want to live again, Clara. You scare the hell out of me, but you make me want to try." She should be cautious, she knew. She should remember Richard's promises, remember that wanting something didn't make it real or lasting. But sitting here in the warm kitchen with Caleb looking at her like she was something precious and rare, caution felt impossible. "You scare me too," she admitted. "I didn't come here looking for this. I came here broken and desperate, just trying to survive. But somehow you've become—" She struggled for words. "Important. So important that when you were gone, everything felt wrong." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I can't promise you anything fancy. I can't promise it'll be easy. This is a hard life in a hard land, and I'm a difficult man with too much grief in my past. But I can promise I'll never abandon you, never lie to you, never treat you as less than you deserve. If you're willing to take a chance on us, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm not done." He stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "Clara Hayes, you are brave and strong and kind, and you've brought light back into this house, into my life. I don't know if what I feel is love yet. I'm too scared to call it that. But I know it's real, and I know it matters, and I know I want to see where it goes. If you'll have me." She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him, pouring 3 months of longing and fear and hope into the touch of her lips against his. He made a sound deep in his chest and pulled her closer, the kiss deepening into something that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," Clara whispered. "But Caleb, take your time calling it love. I need to believe it when you say it." "Fair enough." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Now go back to bed before Mrs. Hensley comes down and lectures us both about propriety." Clara laughed softly and headed for the stairs. But at the doorway, she paused and looked back. Caleb was watching her with an expression that made her heart skip, tender and possessive and full of promise. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Caleb." She climbed the stairs with warmth spreading through her chest, chasing away the last remnants of fear. The Fletcher brothers were still a threat. Winter was still brutal, life was still uncertain. But for the first time since Richard had abandoned her at that frozen train station, Clara felt like she might actually have a future worth fighting for. And this time, she wasn't facing it alone. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that made the snow sparkle like diamonds. Clara woke feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated, the memory of Caleb's kiss still tingling on her lips. She dressed quickly and headed downstairs, uncertain what the day would bring, but ready to face it. She found the kitchen already bustling with activity. Mrs. Hensley was pulling biscuits from the oven, and Caleb was at the table with Redding and 3 other men, maps spread out before them. "The South Pasture's most vulnerable," one of the men was saying. "That's where they hit us last time." "So we reinforce there," Caleb decided. "Double the watch, set up a rotation so no one's out there alone. And I want tripwires with bells along the main approaches. Low-tech, but effective." Clara poured coffee and began helping Mrs. Hensley with breakfast, hyper-aware of Caleb's presence just feet away. Once, their eyes met across the kitchen, and the heat in his gaze made her nearly drop the pan of bacon she was carrying. Mrs. Hensley noticed and made a harumphing sound that might have been approval or exasperation. Either way, she said nothing, just shook her head and kept cooking. The hands filed in for breakfast, and Clara noticed they were all armed now, rifles propped near the door, gun belts worn even inside. The easy camaraderie of earlier weeks had been replaced by alert wariness. These men were preparing for war. After breakfast, as the hands dispersed to their various tasks, Caleb caught Clara in the hallway. He glanced around to make sure they were alone, then pulled her into the study and closed the door. "I meant what I said last night," he said without preamble. "All of it. But I need to know you understand what you're getting into. The Fletcher brothers won't give up easily. Things could get dangerous, possibly violent. If you want to go back to town until this is resolved, I'll understand. I'll make sure you have money, a place to stay." "I'm not leaving," Clara interrupted firmly. "This is my home now. These are my people. I'm staying." Something fierce and proud flashed in his eyes. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, hard and quick, then released her and stepped back. "All right, then we need to make you safe. Redding's going to teach you and Mrs. Hensley how to shoot, just basic rifle handling, enough to defend the house if it comes to that. We'll keep weapons loaded and accessible on each floor. And if trouble comes, I need your word you'll listen to whoever's in charge of protecting you." "You have it." Clara touched his face gently. "We'll get through this." "We will," he agreed. Then softer. "Together." The word hung between them like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of everything that mattered. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Redding proved to be a patient teacher, showing Clara and Mrs. Hensley how to load, aim, and fire the heavy rifles. Clara's shoulder ached from the recoil by the time they finished practicing, but she could hit a target at 50 yards, which Redding declared good enough to discourage trouble. That night, as Clara lay in bed with her new rifle propped by the door and moonlight streaming through her window, she thought about how far she'd come from that desperate girl at the train station. She'd found work, yes, and shelter. But more than that, she'd found purpose. She'd found people worth protecting. She'd found a man worth loving, even if that love was still too new and fragile to speak aloud. And tomorrow, whatever came, she would face it standing her ground. Because this was her home now, in a way Boston had never been. This harsh, beautiful land had claimed her, and she had claimed it right back. The Fletcher brothers would learn what Clara Hayes had always known. She was a survivor. And survivors didn't run. They fought. The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn, when the world was still wrapped in that peculiar gray darkness that precedes sunrise. Clara woke to the sound of gunfire and men shouting, her heart slamming against her ribs before her mind had fully processed what was happening. She grabbed the rifle from beside her door and ran into the hallway, nearly colliding with Mrs. Hensley, who emerged from her own room with a shotgun clutched in her capable hands. "Stay together," the older woman commanded, her voice steady despite the fear Clara could see in her eyes. "We go downstairs, lock ourselves in the study like Caleb said. Jamie, get down here now." The boy appeared, pale but determined, dragging his cane and carrying a pistol that looked too large for his young hands. They descended the stairs in a tight cluster, the sounds of chaos growing louder with each step. Through the window, Clara could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, figures moving near the barn, and worst of all, the orange glow of flames. "They've set fire to something," Mrs. Hensley said grimly. "Lord help us all." They barricaded themselves in Caleb's study as planned, pushing the heavy desk against the door and positioning themselves at the windows with weapons ready. Clara's hands were shaking so badly, she had to brace the rifle against the window frame to steady it. Outside, the battle raged with terrifying intensity. She could see Caleb now, fighting alongside his men near the barn. 3 bodies lay motionless in the snow. Whether dead or merely wounded, Clara couldn't tell. The fire was spreading from what looked like the equipment shed, flames licking hungrily at the dry wood despite the snow covering everything. Men were running with buckets, trying to contain the blaze while simultaneously defending against the attackers. A bullet shattered the study window to Clara's left, spraying glass across the floor. Mrs. Hensley returned fire without hesitation, and Clara heard a scream from outside. The reality of what they were doing, actually shooting at human beings with intent to harm or kill, made bile rise in Clara's throat. But she pushed the nausea down and kept her rifle trained on the yard, finger near the trigger, ready to defend this place she'd come to call home. The fight seemed to last forever, though it probably only spanned 20 minutes. Clara fired twice, aiming high deliberately because she couldn't bring herself to shoot to kill, even knowing these men meant to destroy everything Caleb had built. The second shot must have come close enough to matter because the figure she'd aimed at dove behind cover and didn't reappear. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the attack ended. The Fletcher brothers and their hired guns retreated into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving behind destruction and casualties. The moment they vanished, Clara dropped her rifle and ran outside despite Mrs. Hensley's shouted protests. The scene was worse than she'd imagined. The equipment shed was fully engulfed, flames roaring into the sky and spreading toward the barn. Men were forming bucket brigades from the well, desperately fighting to save the larger structure. Blood stained the snow in several places, and Clara counted 4 men down, 3 attackers and 1 of their own. She found Caleb near the barn, his face blackened with soot, a gash bleeding above his left eye. He was shouting orders about the fire, directing men with the calm authority of someone who'd trained for exactly this kind of crisis. When he saw Clara, relief flashed across his features for just an instant before the mask of command returned. "You're supposed to be in the study," he said, but there was no heat in his voice. "The fight's over. Who's hurt?" "Redding took a bullet to the shoulder. Tucker's got a nasty cut on his leg. Could be worse." His eyes swept the burning shed with frustration. "We're going to lose the building, but if we can keep it from spreading, that's acceptable." Clara ran toward the house, nearly slipping on ice in her haste. She found Mrs. Hensley already setting up a makeshift infirmary in the kitchen, boiling water and laying out bandages with practiced efficiency. Together they worked through the chaos of the next hours, cleaning wounds, stitching cuts, extracting a bullet from Redding's shoulder, while the stoic foreman gritted his teeth and refused to cry out. "You've got steady hands," Redding managed through his pain as Clara worked. "Could have been a field surgeon." "I'm just doing what needs doing," Clara replied, concentrating on the delicate work of removing metal from flesh without causing more damage. "Like everyone else here." By the time the sun fully rose, painting the destruction in harsh winter light, they'd managed to save the barn and most of the other outbuildings. The equipment shed was a total loss, reduced to smoking timbers and twisted metal. 3 of the attackers lay dead in the snow, their bodies covered with canvas tarps until the sheriff could be summoned. The fourth, one of the Fletcher brothers himself, had been captured alive, now tied securely in the barn with two armed guards watching him. Clara found Caleb sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. She sat down beside him without a word, and after a moment he reached for her hand and held it tightly. "I killed a man tonight," he said quietly. "Shot him when he tried to torch the barn with our horses still inside. Watched him fall. Watched him die." Clara squeezed his hand, searching for the right words. "You protected what was yours. Protected all of us. That man made his choice when he came here with violence. I know, doesn't make it easier to live with." He turned to look at her, his eyes haunted. "This is what I meant when I said this life is hard, Clara. This is the reality of the frontier: violence, death, impossible choices. And it's only going to get harder before it gets easier. The remaining Fletcher brothers won't let this go. They'll come back, or they'll strike somewhere else, or they'll hire more guns. This isn't over." "Then we'll face what comes next," Clara said firmly. "Together. That's what you said, remember? Together." Something like gratitude flickered across his face. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, ignoring the blood and soot that covered them both. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Clara agreed with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway." The sheriff arrived by mid-morning, a lean man named Harrison with sharp eyes and a perpetually skeptical expression. He examined the bodies, interviewed witnesses, and spent a long time questioning the captured Fletcher brother in the barn. When he emerged, his face was grim. "This was attempted murder and arson," he told Caleb. "Open and shut case. The prisoner's singing like a bird, trying to save his own neck. Says the whole thing was his older brother Samuel's idea, revenge for you killing their youngest brother back in October." "It was self-defense then, and it's self-defense now," Caleb replied evenly. "My men caught Matthew Fletcher stealing our cattle. He drew on them first. We have 3 witnesses who'll swear to it." "I believe you. Problem is, Samuel Fletcher doesn't care about facts or justice. He cares about blood vengeance. This attack failing is only going to make him madder." Harrison shook his head. "I can take the prisoner back to town, hold him for trial. But I can't protect you from Samuel. He's got money, connections, and no conscience. You need to be ready for another attack." "We'll be ready," Caleb said, but Clara heard the weariness in his voice. After the sheriff left, taking the prisoner and the bodies with him, the ranch settled into uneasy quiet. The men worked on repairs, replacing burned wood and cleaning up the worst of the destruction. Clara and Mrs. Hensley prepared an enormous meal, feeding exhausted men who ate mechanically, too tired to taste what they were consuming. That night, as Clara finally collapsed into her bed well after midnight, every muscle screaming with fatigue, she heard a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Caleb standing there, still wearing his smoke-stained clothes, looking lost. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. She stepped aside and he entered, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her with desperate intensity. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," he said against her hair. "If they'd gotten into the house, if they'd hurt you, I can't stop seeing it in my head." Clara held him tightly, feeling him shake with reaction and exhaustion. "But they didn't. I'm safe. We all are. This time. But next time. Next time we'll fight again," Clara interrupted. "Caleb, listen to me. I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting from reality. I grew up in a foundling home, remember? I've seen cruelty and violence and death. I've lived through poverty and abandonment and betrayal. I'm still here. I'm still standing, and I'm not going anywhere." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "Why? Why would you choose this? You could go back to Boston, find a nice safe job somewhere, marry some clerk who'd give you a comfortable life without gunfights and cattle rustlers and buildings burning in the night. Why would you stay here?" Clara reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle on his bruised and soot-stained skin. "Because comfortable isn't the same as happy. Because safety isn't the same as being alive. And because when I look at you, I see a man worth fighting for. This place, these people, this life. It's real in a way nothing in Boston ever was. I'd rather face danger with you than face boredom with anyone else." Caleb kissed her then, slow and deep, and full of everything words couldn't express. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I didn't think I could feel this way again after Sarah, but here you are, and I can't seem to stop it. Maybe don't even want to stop it anymore." Clara's heart felt too large for her chest. "I'm falling in love with you too. Have been for weeks, probably. I was just too scared to admit it." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing another future. Scared of hoping for something and having it ripped away. Scared that maybe I'm not meant to have happiness, that maybe I used up all my chances when I trusted Richard." She blinked back tears. "But tonight, when I thought I might lose you, I realized being scared doesn't protect me from anything. It just makes me smaller. So I'm choosing to be brave instead. I'm choosing this, choosing you, choosing us." He kissed her again, and this time there was something like wonder in it. "Stay with me tonight," he said. I'm not asking for anything improper. I just don't want to be alone. I just want to hold you and remember that we survived, that we're here, that we have this." Clara knew she should say no, should maintain propriety, should worry about her reputation. But propriety seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford, not after everything they'd been through. So she simply nodded and let him pull her down onto her bed, both of them fully clothed, wrapped around each other like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to the same piece of driftwood. They talked quietly through the night, sharing stories and fears and hopes. Caleb told her about Sarah, about their courtship and marriage, about holding his wife's hand as she died and feeling like his heart was dying with her. Clara told him about the foundling home, about the loneliness of never belonging anywhere, about Richard's betrayal and standing at that frozen train station with $5 and shattered dreams. "I'm glad he left you," Caleb said, and when Clara pulled back in surprise, he shook his head. "I don't mean I'm glad he hurt you. I mean I'm glad you ended up here instead of wherever he was planning to take you, because if he'd kept his promises, you'd be his wife right now, and I'd never have met you, and that would be a tragedy." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Get used to it. I plan on saying nice things to you for the rest of my life." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Warren?" He went very still. "Would you say yes if it was?" Clara's heart hammered in her chest. They'd known each other barely 3 months. This was too fast, too soon, too reckless. Every practical bone in her body was screaming caution. But she thought about standing in the study with a rifle, defending this place that had become home. She thought about Caleb's kiss, his declarations, his steady presence that had become the anchor point of her existence. She thought about how short life was, how quickly everything could be taken away, how stupid it would be to waste time being cautious when they could be building something real. "Yes," she said firmly. "I would say yes." Caleb's expression transformed, wonder and joy chasing away the shadows that had haunted his face for so long. "Then marry me, Clara Hayes. Marry me and be my wife and help me run this ranch and raise cattle and build a life worth living. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my days proving I'm worthy of you." "Yes," Clara said again, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." He kissed her with such tenderness that her heart ached. Then he pulled the ring from his own hand, a simple gold band, worn smooth with years of use, and slipped it onto her finger. It was too large, spinning loosely, but Clara closed her fist around it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "It was my father's," Caleb said, "and his father's before that. I'll get you a proper ring in town, something that fits, something pretty." "This is perfect," Clara interrupted. "It means something. It has history. I don't want some new ring from a store. I want this one." They held each other as the night wore on toward dawn, both of them too wired and emotional to sleep despite their exhaustion. They made plans. A small wedding in town once things settled, maybe in the spring. They'd fix up the house, maybe add on a room or two for the children they both tentatively hoped for. They'd expand the herd, hire more help, make the Circle W into the kind of ranch that would last for generations. "We're really doing this," Clara said wonderingly as gray dawn light began to filter through the window. "Getting married, building a life together." "We really are," Caleb kissed her forehead. "And I promise you, Clara, I will never abandon you. I will never lie to you. I will work every day to deserve the gift of your trust. You have my word, my oath, my everything." "I believe you," Clara whispered. And she did. But their peaceful moment was shattered by shouting from outside. Caleb was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Clara joined him and felt her blood run cold at what she saw. The barn was on fire again. And this time, the flames were spreading faster, driven by wind that had picked up during the night. "Samuel Fletcher," Caleb said grimly. "He came back." They raced downstairs to find chaos erupting once more. The hands were already fighting the fire, but it was worse this time. The barn was old, dry, full of hay and wood that burned like tinder. And worse, they could hear the horses inside screaming with terror. Caleb was running before Clara could stop him, charging into the burning barn while his men shouted warnings. She watched in horror as he disappeared into the smoke, and every second he didn't reappear felt like an eternity. Other men followed him in, and together they began leading horses out, the panicked animals fighting their rescuers even as those rescuers risked their lives to save them. Clara ran to help, grabbing halters and leading ropes, talking soothingly to frightened horses, and guiding them to safety in the paddock far from the flames. The heat was intense, smoke making her eyes water and her lungs burn, but she kept working alongside the men until every horse was accounted for, except one. Caleb's prize stallion, Thunder, was still inside. "Boss, let him go!" Redding shouted, his injured shoulder bleeding again from the exertion. "The whole thing's coming down!" But Caleb went back in anyway, and Clara's heart stopped beating. She counted seconds that felt like hours, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, bargaining with the universe to please. Please let him come out alive. Then he emerged, leading the terrified stallion, his clothes smoking and his face blackened with soot. The moment he cleared the door, a section of the roof collapsed with a roar of flames and crashing timber. If he'd been 30 seconds slower, he would have been crushed. Clara was running before she knew she'd moved, throwing herself at Caleb despite the heat radiating from him, checking him frantically for injuries. "Are you insane? You could have died." "But I didn't." He coughed, and she heard the rattle in his lungs from smoke inhalation. "Thunder's worth $300. Couldn't just let him burn." "I don't care about the damn horse." Clara was crying now, fear and relief making her shake. "I care about you, you stubborn, reckless, impossible man. Don't you ever scare me like that again." He pulled her close despite his smoke-drenched state. "I'm sorry. I'm all right. We're all right." But they weren't all right. The barn was a total loss, burned to the ground with nothing salvageable. And when dawn fully broke and they could assess the damage properly, they found something that made Caleb's face go hard with fury. A message, painted in crude letters on the side of the chicken coop. "This ain't over, Samuel." "He was here," Redding said quietly. "While we were all fighting the fire, he left us a warning." Caleb stared at the message, his jaw clenched so tight Clara could see the muscle jumping. "Then we end this. Today. No more waiting for him to strike. We take the fight to him." "Boss, that's exactly what he wants," Redding protested. "He's trying to provoke you into doing something rash." "I don't care what he wants. I care about protecting my people, my home, my future wife." Caleb's voice was steel. "Samuel Fletcher wants a war? Then I'll give him one. But on my terms, not his." Clara grabbed his arm. "Caleb, think about this. I have thought about it. All night while I held you and planned our future, I thought about it. And I realized something. As long as Samuel Fletcher is out there plotting revenge, we'll never be safe. Our children won't be safe. Every person on this ranch will be looking over their shoulder for the rest of their lives. That's not acceptable." He turned to address his assembled men, all of them exhausted, many of them injured, but every face showing grim determination. "I'm riding to the Fletcher Ranch today. I'm taking 6 men, volunteers only. The rest stay here to protect the women and rebuild. We're going to end this one way or another. Anyone who doesn't want to be part of it, I understand. This is going to get ugly." Every hand volunteered. Caleb selected his 6, the best fighters, the most experienced, and they began preparing weapons and horses. Clara watched with mounting dread, knowing she couldn't stop him, but hating the necessity of what he was about to do. She pulled him aside before he could mount up. Promise me you'll come back. I promise. Promise me you'll be smart, not just brave. I promise that too. Promise me. Her voice broke. Promise me I'm not going to become a widow before I even become a wife. Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. Clara Hayes, I have every intention of marrying you, growing old with you, and annoying you for the next 50 years. This is just one more obstacle to get through. Trust me. I do trust you. That's what terrifies me. He kissed her, long and deep and full of promise, then pulled away and swung up onto Thunder's back. The stallion, still nervous from the fire, danced sideways, but Caleb controlled him with easy competence. Mrs. Hensley, you're in charge until we get back, he called. Barricade the house if you need to. Don't take chances. And Clara? He looked down at her, his expression softening. Start planning our wedding. I want something to look forward to when I get home. Then he was gone, riding out with his men into the winter morning, leaving Clara standing in the ruins of their burned barn, with tears freezing on her cheeks and terror clawing at her heart. Mrs. Hensley came to stand beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. He'll come back. Caleb Warren always comes back. You said that before, Clara whispered. But what if this time is different? What if this is the time his luck runs out? Then we honor him by staying strong and protecting what he built, Mrs. Hensley said firmly. But I don't think it'll come to that. That man has something to live for now. He has you. Clara held on to that thought like a lifeline as the hours crawled by. She threw herself into work, helping to clear debris from the barn, tending to the horses in their temporary paddock, cooking an enormous midday meal for the remaining hands. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from imagining all the ways this could go wrong. Jamie found her in the kitchen that afternoon, staring out the window in the direction Caleb had ridden. He's going to be fine, the boy said confidently. The boss is the toughest man I know, and he's got you to come back to now. That makes him even tougher. You really think so? I know so. I've seen how he looks at you, Miss Clara, like you hung the moon and stars. A man with that much to live for doesn't take stupid chances. Clara wished she could share his confidence, but as afternoon bled into evening with no word, her anxiety grew into full-blown fear. She paced the kitchen, unable to settle, jumping at every sound. It was after dark when she finally heard horses approaching. She ran to the door, her heart in her throat, and nearly collapsed with relief when she saw Caleb riding at the head of his men. They were battered, bloodied, exhausted, but they were alive. All of them were alive. Caleb dismounted stiffly, and Clara saw he was favoring his left side. Before she could ask, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. It's over, he said roughly. Samuel Fletcher is dead. The territorial marshal was already looking for him on other charges. Turns out he'd been running a rustling ring across 3 counties. When we got there with evidence of his attacks on our ranch, the marshal moved in. Samuel tried to shoot his way out. Didn't work. You're hurt, Claire said, pulling back to examine him properly. There was blood on his shirt, though whether it was his or someone else's she couldn't tell. Flesh wound, nothing serious. Doc can look at it tomorrow. He cupped her face in his hands. Clara, I kept my promise. I came back to you. She kissed him with relief and joy and residual fear, not caring who was watching. When they finally broke apart, she saw several of the hands grinning despite their exhaustion. All right, you've had your moment, Mrs. Hensley called from the doorway. Now get inside, all of you. Food's ready and you all look half dead. We'll celebrate being alive tomorrow. Tonight, we just survive. They ate together in the kitchen. Too many people crowded into too small a space, but nobody minded. There was laughter and storytelling, tension bleeding away as the reality of their victory sank in. The Fletcher threat was ended. They were safe. They could finally move forward without looking over their shoulders. Later, after everyone had dispersed to their beds, Caleb and Clara stood on the porch and looked out over the ranch. The barn was gone. The equipment shed was gone. There was damage that would take months to fully repair. But the land was still there. The house was intact, and every person who mattered had survived. We'll rebuild, Caleb said quietly. Bigger and better than before. This ranch is going to thrive, Clara. I promise you that. I believe you. She leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his strength, his steady presence. When do you want to get married? Tomorrow, if you'd let me. But I suppose we should wait a respectable amount of time, make proper plans, do things right. Clara thought about that, about propriety and expectations and all the rules she'd been taught to follow. Then she thought about how quickly everything could be taken away, how precious time was, how stupid it would be to wait when they could be building their life together right now. "Let's not wait," she said. "Let's get married as soon as we can arrange it. Life's too short and too uncertain to waste on being proper." Caleb smiled, and in that smile she saw hope and love and a future worth fighting for. "Have I told you lately that you're extraordinary?" "Not in the last 5 minutes." "Well, you are. You're brave and strong and beautiful, and I'm the luckiest man alive." Clara looked up at him, this complicated, grieving, fiercely protective man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing, who'd shown her what real love looked like. "No," she said softly. "I'm the lucky one. I was left at a station with no money and no home until a cowboy said I had both with him. And he was right. I have everything now." They stood together on the porch as the stars wheeled overhead and the Montana wind whispered through the pines, two people who'd been broken by life and had somehow found wholeness in each other. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. Tomorrow they'd start planning a wedding. Tomorrow they'd begin rebuilding what the fire had destroyed. Tomorrow they'd take the first steps toward the future they'd claimed for themselves. But tonight, they simply held each other and were grateful to be alive, to be together, to have survived the worst and come out stronger for it. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The morning after the confrontation with Samuel Fletcher dawned crisp and bright, the kind of winter day that seemed to promise new beginnings. Clara woke before the rooster crowed, her body conditioned now to ranch hours, and found herself reaching across the bed before remembering she was alone. Caleb had returned to his own room sometime after midnight, propriety winning out despite their engagement. But the memory of his arms around her, his promises whispered in the darkness, warmed her more effectively than any fire. She dressed quickly and headed downstairs to find Mrs. Hensley already in the kitchen, humming an old hymn as she stoked the stove. The older woman looked up at Clara's entrance and smiled knowingly. "Morning, bride-to-be. Sleep well?" Clara felt her cheeks heat. "Well enough? Has Caleb come down yet?" "Been up for an hour already, meeting with Redding about the rebuilding plans. That man doesn't know how to rest." Mrs. Hensley handed Clara a cup of coffee. "But I suppose that's what makes him good at what he does. Speaking of which, we need to talk about this wedding of yours. You said you didn't want to wait, which I respect, but there are still arrangements to be made." They spent the next hour planning while preparing breakfast, their conversation punctuated by the sounds of men arriving for the morning meal. Clara wanted something simple, a ceremony in town, perhaps at the small church, with just the ranch hands and a few townspeople. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would require months of preparation or money they didn't have. "What about your dress?" Mrs. Hensley asked practically. "You can't get married in a work dress." Clara thought about the bolt of blue fabric she'd bought in town, still sitting unused in her room. "I could make something. I have the fabric, and I used to be quite good at sewing. If I work on it in the evenings, I could have it ready in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Mrs. Hensley's eyebrows rose. "You really don't want to wait, do you?" "Life's too uncertain," Clara said quietly. "These past few days proved that. I don't want to waste time on elaborate preparations when we could be building our life together." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right, and I think Caleb feels the same way. That man's been alone too long. He's ready to move forward. So 2 weeks it is. I'll start making arrangements with the Reverend." When Caleb came in for breakfast, he looked exhausted but satisfied. The wound in his side, which turned out to be a graze from a bullet rather than anything serious, had been properly cleaned and bandaged by Mrs. Hensley. He moved stiffly but without complaint, and when his eyes met Clara's across the kitchen, they held such warmth that she felt her heart skip. After the hands had been fed and had dispersed to their various tasks, Caleb pulled Clara aside. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her outside, past the smoking ruins of the barn, toward a slight rise that overlooked the ranch. From here, the full scope of the Circle W was visible. The house, the remaining outbuildings, the vast expanse of snow-covered grazing land stretching to the mountains in the distance. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, that Clara had learned to appreciate. "I've been thinking about the rebuilding," Caleb said, his arm around her shoulders as they surveyed his domain. "The barn needs to be replaced, obviously, and bigger than before. We're expanding the herd this spring, so we'll need more capacity. But I also want to add on to the house." "Add on to it?" "A nursery," he said, and Clara heard both hope and uncertainty in his voice. "And maybe another bedroom or two for when the nursery's occupied and we need space for more children. If that's something you want." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. After Sarah's death in childbirth, she'd assumed Caleb might never want to risk that pain again. But here he was, planning for a family, choosing hope over fear. "I want that," she said softly. "Very much. A house full of children, noise, life. Everything this place has been missing." He pulled her closer, his chin resting on top of her head. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Terrified, actually, of losing you the way I lost Sarah. But I realized something during that fight yesterday. Fear doesn't protect us from anything. It just keeps us from living, and I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of just existing. I want to live again, Clara. With you." She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "We'll face whatever comes together, and I'm stronger than I look. I survived 18 years in a foundling home, remember? I can survive anything. I know you can. That's one of the things I love about you." He kissed her gently. 2 weeks, you told Mrs. Hensley? Is that too soon?" "It's not soon enough, but I suppose I can wait 14 more days." His eyes sparkled with something that looked like mischief. "Though, if you wanted to make it sooner, I wouldn't object." Clara laughed. 2 weeks gives me time to make a proper dress and for us to prepare the house. Besides, your mother should be able to travel by then. Don't you want her here for the wedding?" Caleb's expression softened. "I sent her a telegram yesterday, told her about you and the wedding. She wrote back this morning. She's thrilled and insists on coming despite my sister's protests. Says she wouldn't miss her only son's wedding for anything. I can't wait to meet her. She'll love you. How could she not?" He kissed her again, longer this time, and Clara lost herself in the warmth of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb groaned. 14 days is going to be torture." "Then we'd better stay busy," Clara said practically, though her heart was racing. They spent the next 2 weeks in a flurry of activity that left little time for romantic interludes, but brought them closer in a different way. They worked side by side, planning the new barn, consulting with the hands about the best design and materials. Clara spent evenings sewing her wedding dress by lamplight, while Caleb worked on ranch ledgers, both of them companionably silent in his study. They made decisions together about household matters, ranch business, their future, learning the rhythm of partnership that would define their marriage. The dress came together beautifully, the blue fabric falling in simple, elegant lines that flattered Clara's figure without being ostentatious. She'd added touches of lace at the collar and cuffs, salvaged from one of her old dresses from Boston. It wasn't the elaborate gown she'd once imagined wearing, but it was honest and real, made by her own hands for a marriage she'd chosen freely. Jamie's leg had healed enough that he could walk without the cane, though he still limped. He threw himself into wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had much happiness to celebrate. He helped Mrs. Hensley plan the reception meal, decorated the church with pine boughs and winter berries, and appointed himself the unofficial overseer of every detail. "This is going to be the best wedding Willow Creek has ever seen," he declared one evening as he arranged wildflowers he'd somehow found growing in a sheltered spot near the creek. "Even if it's happening fast, it's going to be perfect." Clara hugged him impulsively. "Thank you, Jamie, for everything. You've become like family to me." The boy's face turned red with pleasure. "Your family too, Miss Clara. You and the boss both. This ranch is the only home I've ever really had, and you've made it feel like a proper home instead of just a place to work." Caleb's mother arrived 3 days before the wedding, brought from the train station by Caleb himself. Margaret Warren was a small, iron-haired woman with her son's gray-blue eyes and a warmth that immediately put Clara at ease. Despite her recent illness, she moved with determined energy, and within an hour of arriving, she'd inspected every corner of the house and declared it a good foundation for a family. "You'll make my son happy," she told Clara directly, taking her hands across the kitchen table. "I can see it in his eyes. He's been dead inside since Sarah passed, just going through motions. But you've brought him back to life. That's a precious gift, dear girl. He's done the same for me, Clara replied honestly. I was lost when I came here. Broken. He gave me a chance to rebuild myself. Margaret nodded approvingly. That's what love should do, make both people stronger. Not like some marriages where one person diminishes the other. You and Caleb, you'll be partners, equals. That's rare and valuable. The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, her last night in this room as Clara Hayes, and thought about how far she'd traveled in just 4 months. From abandoned and hopeless to loved and cherished. From having nothing to having everything that mattered. She heard a soft knock on her door and opened it to find Caleb standing there in his nightshirt, looking as restless as she felt. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Too much thinking. He glanced down the hallway to make sure they were alone, then pulled her into her room and closed the door. I know I'm not supposed to see you before the wedding tomorrow, but I needed to talk to you, to make sure you're certain about this. Clara stared at him. Are you getting cold feet? God, no, the opposite. I'm so certain it terrifies me. I just need to know you feel the same way, that you're not agreeing to this because you think you owe me something or because you don't have other options. I need to know you're choosing me, not just accepting the situation you're in. Clara took his face in her hands, making sure he was looking directly at her. Caleb Warren, I am choosing you, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every part of it. Because you make me braver and stronger and happier than I've ever been. Because I love you with everything I am. She watched relief and joy wash over his face. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. I thought I'd used up my chance at happiness with Sarah. I thought I was done with love. But then you showed up at that train station with your fierce pride and your determination, and you turned my whole world upside down. Is that a complaint? It's a thank you. He kissed her softly. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for being brave enough to trust me. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for asking, Clara whispered back. Thank you for seeing something worth saving when I was at my lowest. Thank you for building a home I could belong to. They held each other in the darkness, and Clara felt a peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. This was right. This was real. This was forever. I should go, Caleb said reluctantly. It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding. I don't believe in luck. I believe in us. Still, he kissed her forehead. I'll see you at the church tomorrow. Don't be late. Wouldn't dream of it. After he left, Clara finally slept, her dreams full of white snow and blue skies and gray eyes that looked at her like she was everything. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the winter sun sparkling on fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Clara woke with butterflies in her stomach, but no doubts in her heart. Mrs. Hensley and Margaret helped her dress, fussing over every detail until the blue dress hung perfectly, and Clara's hair was arranged in an elegant style that made her look older, more sophisticated. You're beautiful, Margaret said with tears in her eyes. My son is a lucky man. I'm the lucky one, Clara replied, but she was smiling. They traveled to town in the wagon, with Jamie driving and chattering nervously the entire way. The church was small but packed with people, all the ranch hands, several families from town, even the sheriff who'd helped end the Fletcher threat. And at the front, standing beside the Reverend, was Caleb. He wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, and when he saw Clara walking down the aisle, his expression transformed into something so full of love and wonder that she felt tears prick her eyes. She'd never felt more certain of anything than she was in this moment, walking toward this man who'd saved her, and whom she'd somehow saved in return. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows that were traditional but felt deeply personal. When Caleb slipped a new ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that fit perfectly, unlike his father's ring she'd worn for 2 weeks, Clara felt something click into place in her soul. This was right. This was home. This was forever. I now pronounce you man and wife, the Reverend intoned. You may kiss your bride. Caleb kissed her with such tenderness that Clara forgot they had an audience. She forgot everything except the feeling of his lips on hers and the absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The reception at the ranch was boisterous and joyful, with more food than they could eat and music provided by several hands who proved surprisingly talented with instruments. Clara danced with Caleb, with Redding, with Jamie, with half the men on the ranch. She accepted congratulations from people she'd never met and felt embraced by a community that had claimed her as one of their own. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Caleb pulled her away from the party and led her to the porch. The sounds of celebration drifted out from inside, but here it was quiet, peaceful. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Deliriously," Clara replied honestly. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream." "If it's a dream, we're both having it." He turned her to face him, his expression growing serious. "Clara Warren," I like the sound of that, "I want you to know something. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice, making sure you feel loved and valued and cherished. You took a chance on a grieving rancher with too much land and not enough heart, and I'm going to make sure you never regret it." "You had plenty of heart," Clara corrected gently. "It was just broken. We've both been broken in different ways. But maybe that's what makes this work. We understand each other's cracks and scars." "I like that." He kissed her softly. "We're both works in progress. And we'll keep working on each other, together, for the rest of our lives." They stood on the porch as the party continued inside and the Montana sky darkened above them. Two people who'd been lost and had found each other against all odds. Clara thought about that desperate girl at the train station 4 months ago, heartbroken and hopeless, with $5 and no future. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the abandonment would lead to something better than she'd ever imagined. But maybe she didn't need to. Maybe that girl had always known, deep down, that she was strong enough to survive anything. And maybe this ranch, this man, this life, they'd been waiting for her all along. The weeks following the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt both new and comfortable. Clara moved her belongings from the spare room into Caleb's bedroom, and the intimacy of sharing space with him felt like the most natural thing in the world. They woke together before dawn, worked side by side through the day, and fell into bed exhausted but content each night. The rebuilding progressed steadily. The new barn rose from the ashes of the old, bigger and more modern, with space for twice as many horses. Caleb hired additional hands as they prepared for spring calving season, and Clara found herself managing a household that seemed to grow more complex by the day. But she loved it. She loved the challenge of feeding 20 men 3 times a day, of keeping a sprawling ranch house clean and functional, of managing supplies and coordinating with Mrs. Hensley to keep everything running smoothly. She'd spent her whole life learning to be useful, and now that usefulness had purpose beyond mere survival. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire in the parlor, Caleb pulled out a leather-bound book and handed it to Clara. "My mother gave me this before she left. She said every family should have a history, and since we're starting our own, we should document it properly." Clara opened the book to find the first page inscribed in Margaret's neat handwriting: "The Warren family of the Circle W Ranch." Below that, blank pages waited to be filled. "She wants us to record our story," Clara said wonderingly. "Births, deaths, important events, a legacy." "A future," Caleb corrected. "She's giving us permission to build something new while honoring what came before." Clara ran her hand over the empty pages, thinking about what they would fill them with. Their wedding, certainly. The rebuilding of the ranch, and someday, God willing, the births of their children. Graduations, marriages, all the moments that would make up a life well lived. "We should start with how we met," she said impulsively. "The real story, not the sanitized version. How I was abandoned at a train station and you gave me a chance." Caleb nodded slowly. "And how you took that chance and turned it into something neither of us expected. How you fought beside us when the Fletcher brothers attacked. How you proved that courage has nothing to do with where you come from and everything to do with who you choose to be." They spent the evening writing their story together, taking turns with the pen, sometimes laughing at the memories and sometimes falling quiet with emotion. When they finally closed the book hours later, Clara felt like they'd created something important, a testament to the idea that broken people could build beautiful things if they were brave enough to try. February brought harsh weather that tested everyone's endurance. A blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days, and even after it passed, the cold was so intense that water froze in pipes despite their best efforts. The cattle suffered, and they lost several head to the weather despite the hands' tireless efforts to protect the herd. But they survived, and with each challenge overcome, Clara felt herself becoming more deeply rooted in this place. She no longer thought of herself as someone temporarily staying at the Circle W. This was her home now, her land, her responsibility. She belonged here in a way she'd never belonged anywhere else. One morning in early March, Clara woke feeling nauseated. She barely made it to the chamber pot before losing what little was in her stomach. Caleb woke at the sound and was beside her instantly, holding back her hair and looking worried. "Are you sick? Should I ride for the doctor?" "No," Clara said weakly, then felt another wave of nausea. But even through the discomfort, she felt a flutter of hope. "I think I might be pregnant." Caleb went very still. "Are you sure?" "Not certain, but I've missed my monthly courses. And this nausea, it's how the women at the foundling home described it when they helped in the infirmary." She looked up at him, trying to read his expression. "Are you happy about this?" Instead of answering, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he finally pulled back, there were tears on his face. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, yes, but also happier than I have any right to be." They sent for Doc Anderson that afternoon, and he confirmed what Clara suspected. She was approximately 2 months along, due in late October. The doctor examined her carefully and pronounced her healthy and strong. "You're built for childbearing, Mrs. Warren," he said with professional approval. "Good hips, strong constitution. Barring any complications, I don't foresee any problems. Just rest when you can, eat well, and don't overdo the heavy work." After he left, Caleb insisted on Clara sitting down immediately and staying off her feet for the rest of the day. She laughed at his overprotectiveness, but secretly loved it. After so many years of having no one to care about her well-being, having a husband who worried over every little thing felt like a luxury. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she reminded him that evening as he fussed over her dinner. "Women work through pregnancy all the time. I'm not going to break." "I know, but after Sarah—" He trailed off, the old pain flickering across his face. Clara took his hand. "I'm not Sarah, and this baby isn't that baby. Every pregnancy is different, every outcome uncertain, but we can't live in fear of what might happen. We have to trust that we'll face whatever comes together." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right, but I'm still going to worry. I wouldn't want you any other way." The news of Clara's pregnancy spread through the ranch like wildfire, and suddenly she was treated like fragile china by everyone. The hands tipped their hats extra respectfully, Mrs. Hensley clucked over her constantly, and even Jamie became absurdly protective, insisting on carrying anything heavier than a soup ladle. "I'm going to go crazy if everyone keeps treating me like an invalid," Clara complained to Margaret during one of the older woman's visits. "I'm pregnant, not dying." Margaret laughed. "Welcome to motherhood, dear. Everyone has an opinion about what you should and shouldn't do, and they're all different. My advice? Do what feels right to you and ignore everyone else. You know your body better than anyone." As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, revealing the land beneath, Clara felt new life stirring all around. Calves were born, filling the pastures with gangly youngsters. The garden plot Mrs. Hensley had maintained began to show green shoots. The new barn was completed, strong and weatherproof. And inside Clara, a baby grew. Her baby, Caleb's baby. A symbol of everything they'd built together. She spent long afternoons sitting on the porch, her hands on her growing belly, watching Caleb work with the horses in the corral. Sometimes he'd look up and catch her watching, and his smile was so full of joy and wonder that it made her heart ache. One evening in late May, as they lay in bed with Caleb's hand on her rounded stomach, Clara felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. "Feel what?" "The baby. It moved. Here." She guided his hand to where she'd felt the movement, and after a moment it happened again, stronger this time. Caleb's expression transformed into something close to reverence. "That's our baby. That's our child, moving and growing and alive. His voice broke. Clara, we made this. Together. We did, she agreed, tears streaming down her own face. We made a miracle. Summer brought hard work, but also contentment. Claire's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and despite Doc Anderson's warnings about rest, she couldn't bring herself to sit idle. She worked in the garden, canned vegetables for winter, continued managing the household. Her body changed, growing round and awkward, but she felt stronger than ever. Caleb remained protective, but learned to trust that Clara knew her limits. They talked about names, about how to arrange the nursery, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. They shared their fears, his about losing her, hers about being a good mother when she'd never known her own, and in sharing, diminished them. In August, they received word that Victoria Ashford had married a banker from Denver and moved away. The news was met with relief rather than regret. That chapter of Caleb's life was truly closed, and the future belonged entirely to Clara and the family they were building. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall color in the aspen groves. Clara's belly was enormous now, her movements limited, her patience with her own body wearing thin. She was ready to not be pregnant anymore, ready to meet this child who'd been part of her for so long. On October 15th, 3 days before Doc Anderson's predicted due date, Clara's water broke while she was making breakfast. The contractions started shortly after, not the mild twinges she'd been experiencing for weeks, but powerful surges that took her breath away. Mrs. Hensley sent Jamie riding for the doctor while she got Clara upstairs and into bed. Caleb appeared moments later, his face pale with fear barely concealed. "I'm here," he said, taking Clara's hand. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good," Clara gasped as another contraction hit, "because I might need to break some of your fingers." Labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Doc Anderson arrived and monitored Clara's progress with professional calm, but she could see worry in his eyes as hours passed without significant change. Caleb stayed by her side the entire time, letting her crush his hand during contractions, wiping sweat from her forehead, whispering encouragement and love. "I can't do this," Clara sobbed at one point, exhausted beyond bearing. "It's too hard. I can't." "Yes, you can," Caleb said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived abandonment, poverty, gunfights, and fires. You can survive this. You can do this, Clara. I believe in you." She drew strength from his certainty, and when the doctor told her to push, she bore down with everything she had. Once, twice, 3 times, and then a thin wail split the air, the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. "It's a girl," Doc Anderson announced, holding up a tiny, squirming infant. "Healthy lungs, all her fingers and toes. Congratulations." Clara's exhausted tears turned to joy as the doctor placed her daughter on her chest. The baby was perfect, tiny and red-faced and furious at being born, with a shock of dark hair and gray-blue eyes that would probably change color. But to Clara, she was the most beautiful thing in the world. Caleb was openly weeping as he looked at his daughter, his hand trembling as he touched her tiny head. "She's perfect. Clara, she's absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Clara asked, too exhausted and euphoric to think clearly. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. "Hope," he said finally. "Hope Warren. Because that's what she represents. Hope for the future. Hope that good things can come from pain. Hope that love can heal even the deepest wounds." "Hope," Claire repeated, and it felt right. This tiny girl was indeed their hope, their future, their proof that broken people could create something whole and beautiful. The weeks following Hope's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, of learning how to care for a tiny human who seemed impossibly fragile. But Clara had never been happier. Watching Caleb hold their daughter with such tenderness, seeing the fear in his eyes gradually replaced by confidence as he learned to be a father, filled her with a joy so profound it sometimes took her breath away. Mrs. Hensley proved invaluable, teaching Clara everything she needed to know about caring for an infant. The hands took turns peeking in at the baby, these rough men transformed into gentle giants by the sight of something so small and precious. Jamie appointed himself Hope's unofficial guardian, treating her with such reverence that Clara had to bite back smiles. On a cold December evening, exactly 1 year after Clara had stood at that frozen train station with nothing but broken dreams, she sat in the rocking chair Caleb had made for her, nursing Hope while Caleb added wood to the fire. Snow was falling outside, and the house was warm and full of life. "Do you ever think about that day?" Caleb asked, settling into his own chair. "The day we met?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "I think about how desperate I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then I think about everything that's happened since, and it seems impossible that so much could change in a year." "You changed my life," Caleb said quietly. "I was just existing before you came, going through motions, doing my duty, but not really living. You reminded me what it means to be alive." "You did the same for me." Clara looked down at Hope, now sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You gave me something I'd been searching for my entire life. A home. Not just a place to live, but a home in every sense. A family, a purpose, a future." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to the wind outside. In the kitchen, Mrs. Hensley was humming as she prepared tomorrow's bread. Upstairs, the house creaked and settled. Beyond the windows, the ranch stretched out into the darkness, full of cattle and horses and men who depended on them. "I love you," Caleb said. "I tell you that every day, but I want you to hear it again. I love you more than I thought possible. You and Hope, you're my world now." "I love you too," Clara whispered back, "more than words can say." She thought about Richard Pemberton sometimes, and when she did, it was with gratitude rather than bitterness. His abandonment had seemed like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning. It had brought her to this ranch, to this man, to this life she'd built from nothing. She'd been left at a station with no money and no home, and a cowboy had told her she had both with him. He'd been right. She had everything now: a husband who loved her, a daughter who was her heart made flesh, a home that would stand for generations, and a future brighter than any dream she'd dared to dream. The snow fell softly outside, covering the ranch in white silence. Inside, the fire crackled, the baby slept, and Clara and Caleb sat together in the home they'd built. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and all the daily struggles of ranch life. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. Clara leaned her head back and closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her sleeping daughter in her arms, hearing the steady breathing of her husband nearby, sensing the solidity of the house around them. This was peace. This was home. This was everything. And she would never take it for granted, not for a single day. Years later, when Hope was old enough to understand, Clara would tell her the story of how she came to the Circle W. She would tell her about the frozen train station, the desperate moment when everything seemed lost, and the quiet cowboy who offered her a chance. She would tell her about the fires and the fights, the fear and the courage, the slow building of trust and love. And she would tell her the most important part, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to the best. That being broken doesn't mean being ruined. That love can be found in the most unexpected places, by the most unexpected people, at the most unexpected times. But that was in the future. Tonight, Clara simply sat in her rocking chair, holding her daughter, watching her husband, and being grateful for every moment that had led her here. She'd been abandoned, yes, but she'd also been found. And in finding this home, this family, this life, she'd finally found herself. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, and Hope stirred but didn't wake. Clara pressed a kiss to her daughter's downy head and smiled at Caleb, who smiled back with his whole heart in his eyes. "Merry Christmas, my love," he said softly. "Merry Christmas," Clara replied. And as she looked around at everything they'd built together, this home, this family, this future, she knew with absolute certainty that she had everything she'd ever needed. She was home. Finally,